Bonjour, guten Tag, buenos dias, díomh go léir a chuirde. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this closing session of what has been a wonderfully inspiring and really engaging 4 days around a really, really important topic. My name is Pamela Byrne. I'm the Chief Executive of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, and it is absolutely my great pleasure to co-chair this final closing session for you today. European food is recognised as being safe and have high quality, but we need to continue to make sure that this is the case. But our food system should now also aim for the highest standards of nutrition and sustainability and living within our planetary boundaries. Food systems at a global and EU level need urgent and significant transformation if they are to meet the sustainability targets that we have set and that we have signed up to. With the Farm to Fork strategy, which is at the core of the European Green Deal, there is an accelerating momentum in efforts to make our EU food system more resilient and sustainable, and I would say world-leading. Although the European Green Deal puts sustainability at the heart of EU policy making and reflects the need for systemic change in our food systems, we are still, and over the last 4 days have discussed, how to turn such ambitions into policies and actions. Steering our food systems towards sustainability transformation remains an immense challenge, and we've heard many of those challenges over the last number of days. But indeed, it also provides opportunity. There are many entry points for change, and we've heard about many of those entry points over the last 4 days. This plenary session, the closing session of this conference, entitled Safe and Sustainable Food Systems, How Do We Get There? So over the course of the next couple of hours, you will hear reports from the relevant points emerging from the thematic sessions over the past 4 days of the conference. We will explore how food safety assessments need to be advanced to keep our food safe, while also making it more nutritious and sustainable. We will discuss how taking a One Health approach can help to deliver more integrated, cross-sectoral and collaborative health assessments that go beyond the traditional boundaries that separate scientific disciplines and organisations and involve new stakeholders. We will also explore how more integrated, cross-sectoral and collaborative health assessments could better inform policies that shape food systems transformations. We also hope to formulate recommendations to promote the implementation of a more participatory, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches, and thus facilitate a transition towards more integrated, cross-sectoral, and collaborative health assessments. So we've lots of work to do this morning, and we've put together a very exciting two-part closing session for you this morning. I'll share the first part, which is a series of short videos and key messages from the rapporteurs of each of our conference sessions. One society, one life, one planet, and many ways. We will then continue part one with a moderated panel discussion, and the second part of our session today will be chaired by Dr. Leanne Jackson from the OECD, and will focus on how scientific advice can help to make our food systems fit for the future. Before we kick off, I want to remind you to make sure that you submit all your questions and your comments on the conference app. And please make sure that you follow the conference on the social media and communication platforms. Make sure you like us, make sure you comment on us, make sure you spread the word of the wonderful discussions and interactions that we've had over the last number of days. So let's get started. Our first video is on the One Society track. I'll leave you to view. Thank you.
How do regulators, risk assessors, stakeholders, and the public interact in the risk analysis process? How can organisations find new ways to work better together? This is the focus of One Society.
In the first session, we discussed how collaboration and partnerships will be central in tackling future food safety challenges. We need new models of cooperation so that we can continue to provide trustworthy scientific advice for society.
Our second session focused on how we can use social sciences to integrate societal expectations into our work. We looked at how citizen participation and insights can support One Health policies, as well as risk communication in the digital age.
In the third thematic session, we looked at how institutions can benefit from open science. Opening up science means not only making data available to all, but also promoting co-creation of scientific outputs. That includes the assessment of multiple environmental factors and the impact on human health.
Our final thematic session looked at how to bridge the gap between research and policy. We considered the benefits of involving EU agencies in research and how their collaboration can support EU's research agenda.
We are very honoured to introduce Lynn Frewer, a social scientist from the University of Newcastle. Lynn will report on the outcomes of the One Society track and present recommendations for further action. Please welcome Lynn on stage.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm honoured to be reporting on the One Society track. The first thing I'd like to say was that there was a red thread running through all the sessions: the need for transdisciplinary activity in relation to holistic food systems. I haven't got very much time, it's a quick summary. Considering engagement, the first issue is that there needs to be an understanding of the knowledge ecosystem, how we work together across disciplines to deliver evidence for effective policy. And to do this, we have to make everyone welcome, from the social sciences, all of our stakeholders, and even from the arts and humanities, when we're thinking about engagement. Engagement was another red thread that ran through the session. Thinking about social sciences, traditionally social science research has considered risk perception and communication in risk analysis, but we're moving into a space of participation, of engagement. We need new methods, new spaces for effective engagement, and we need to explore in greater depth how digital methods may enable broader participation with society, with all of our stakeholders, as fora for knowledge exchange. Social science also drives our food systems, it mediates risk and can be assessed as an impact or outcome. Research and policy, again, developing interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary engagement spaces to exchange views, to collaborate between agencies. If we have a One Health approach, it's extremely important that regulators from different agencies interact. And one conclusion was that there's a need for an envy agency cooperation. So a space, a hub, where research can be commissioned, discussed, and interpreted between agencies. Open science drives transparency, it drives trust. It's an essential component of One Society. It should become a default option, something we always consider, something we always do. Reproducibility and scrutiny of data is important, but also developing big collaborative data sets which can be scrutinized, analyzed from outside. That must become a priority. I'm going to wave a flag here also for citizen science. There were some fabulous presentations from how we can gain knowledge and understanding by involving our citizens in the scientific process, setting agendas, collecting data, and interpreting the outputs. They're all different aspects of citizen science. In terms of the track conclusions, within a transdisciplinary food system, not one of us has the expertise to master the complexity in isolation. We need pragmatic solutions. These are based on understanding and involving our citizens, our society, in designing an ideal outcome for food safety research. Agencies need to be involved in research discussions with EP and the Council, but open science, we've clearly seen, is achievable and beneficial. But all of us have to shift to enable us to engage in open science culture. So our track recommendations: create policy and governance conditions for a collaborative ecosystem. We are all dependent on each other. And the problem with ecosystems is that we don't want some of the knowledge species to become extinct. So let's make sure we invite everybody to discuss our food system and how to ensure food security. We need to apply an audience-first approach, always in communication, involvement, and engagement. There needs to be resources to ensure that cross-agency collaboration and a One Health task force will advance scientific advice and enable evidence to be generated to inform that advice. And finally, to provide governance and promote open science and open data literacy, it's important to embed this in scientific practice, but also to produce a new cohort of younger researchers who are signed up not only to open science, but also to transdisciplinarity and engagement with broader society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And it is absolutely fantastic that on the last day of the conference, you're getting some great insights into the discussion that happened over the last number of days. It's just so wonderful at this point in the conference to be hearing recommendations. So things that we can take home, things that we can action. And this is the thread throughout the course of the next number of videos. And the next video you're going to see is the one from the One Life track. Enjoy the video. Thank you.
Our dietary choices are important, not only for our health, but also for fighting disease and protecting our planet. How are these aspects connected, and how can we consider them together? This is the focus of One Life.
In the first session, we discussed how to ensure healthy and sustainable diets for all. We identified drivers for change and the role of key players in this transformation.
Our second session focused on next generation's food and feed that can be both safe and sustainable. We may need more sophisticated tools and approaches to ensure our safety assessments are fit for purpose.
Infectious diseases may affect our food system in multiple ways. In the third thematic session, we explored how to track and predict diseases development so to make our food chain more resilient.
Antimicrobial resistance and its link to the food-producing environment was the subject of our last thematic session. We need to understand those factors that contribute to resistance from a One Health perspective. Only in this way we will be able to tackle this silent pandemic.
We are very honored to introduce Francesco Branca, who is Director of the Department of Nutrition for Health and Development at the World Health Organization. Francesco will report on the outcomes of the One Life track and will recommend points for action. Please welcome Francesco on stage.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction. We did, in fact, have a very lively discussion, but with remarkably aligned messages. And clearly the first important message is that the current patterns of diet make it impossible to stay within planetary boundaries. So we need to shift our diets largely towards plant-based diets. We need to be specific on how to do this. We need to have a new generation of food-based dietary guidelines, and we have tools to make this transition happen. We can nudge the change by improving the way food is offered, the food environment we live in, and also making healthy and sustainable diets more affordable. The cost element is there. Second important message is that innovation is already happening, and innovation on how food is produced, making it a more efficient process, but also introducing new sources. And these novel foods, including, for example, insects, algae, or also food produced through synthetic biologies, are a promising opportunity, but they need to be analyzed with adequate safety assessment. We may introduce new hazards. We don't know. And that's where also our approaches to making that assessment is critical. And then we need to adapt and expand the regulatory instruments to make this innovation feasible and also to make it easier to happen. Now, on the pandemic, we need to better understand what are the emerging threats. We know they are there. And we know that climate change is unfortunately going to make things worse. Even the flooding, I mean, the whole extremes of climate change, they are all going to facilitate the expansion of certain infectious agents. So how do we deal with that? We need to be prepared, monitor, and we need to share data across sectors. We know that some of these threats are in hotspots. We need to monitor those hotspots. And then we need an investment. We need an investment in technology, and particularly on vaccine technology, vaccines for humans and vaccines for animals. And those vaccines need to be available to all. So we need to make a big investment in, for example, the cold chain technology to make sure that we can distribute the vaccines safely all over the world. On antimicrobial resistance, we need to better understand what is the burden that is linked to food production. And we understand now with genomic technologies how this can be mapped. And we need to focus on low-income countries. They're the ones who have the greatest need and the lowest capacity. But then on antimicrobial resistance, really the message is reduce, replace, and rethink. Reduce the use of antimicrobials, for example, by having better hygiene practices. Replace by having less harmful substances, but rethink the food system, rethink the way that food is produced. Now, if we have conclusions, we can say that clearly a One Health approach is critical. But that approach is not theoretical. It shouldn't be only in academic publication. It needs to be very concrete and operationalized and translated into policies. But then we need to really have a participatory approach, an inclusive approach, and collaboration. And this needs to be formalized through adequate One Health governance. And finally, innovation, innovation, innovation. in all ways, innovation in technology, innovation in approaches, innovation in science. What could be our recommendations? Well, we need One Health in sectoral policies. We need to have a clear understanding of how things should be done differently. It's not business as usual. Second point is the finances. We spend enormous amount of resources on agricultural subsidies. They can be repurposed on really achieving health and sustainable objectives. We have agricultural subsidies that can be used to support the establishment of food systems that are producing health and sustainable diets for all. We as people working in regulatory agencies, academia, have a responsibility to develop the tools, the regulatory framework, and the scientific tools to make this happen. And on future pandemic, we have learned a lesson. We need to invest in technology before things happen, but we need to be truly collaborative. We need to invest in exchange. We need to collaborate. And we need to educate. We need to educate the next generation. We need to educate policymakers. We need to educate ourselves and the public, particularly young people, on things to come, because this requires a cultural change. It requires a paradigm shift. We can do it, and we can do it together for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Bruyninckx. I think that was really inspiring, as was the key messages from the first track on One Society. I'm struck really by one of your comments. It's not business as usual. So we need to rethink how we do things, how we engage with one another. And it's really, really important for us to work together and to build on those great collaborations that we also have, but also strengthen them more and become partners in tackling many of these challenges. I'm now going to go to the video, the short video for the third track, which is One Planet. So I leave it to you to enjoy this video. Thank you very much.
One planet means we live within the planet's natural limits. To do this, we need substantial efforts to meet sustainability targets and protect our environment. How can we achieve this? This is the focus of One Planet.
Measuring progress against objectives, it's crucial for the successful transition towards more sustainable food systems. In this first thematic session, we explored the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches.
Our second session focused on how we can advance the environmental risk assessment of pesticides to protect biodiversity and ecosystems. We explored whether a paradigm shift is needed and how to enable it.
In our third thematic session, we look at threats to plant health and their impact on biodiversity, forestry, and agriculture. How we manage these threats has a vital role in ensuring sustainability targets are met.
Our final thematic session looked at how the production of food from animals could become more sustainable. We explored how animal source food can be produced in a way that ensures higher animal welfare, protects our environment, and is economically viable.
We are very honored to introduce Frank Berth, who is a senior livestock specialist in the agriculture global practice of the World Bank. Frank will report on the outcomes of the One Planet track and present recommendations for further action. Please welcome Frank on stage.
Thank you very much. And it will be a virtual stage for me today. Sorry for that. I'm really glad to be with you. It's a challenge to provide an overview of those very rich presentations and lively discussions across the few past days. Starting with the framework for sustainability assessments, clearly the session emphasized the need to embrace the complexity of the word looking at the systems and looking at the real world and real life situations. What was clear also is the need to express the uncertainty when we take this systems approach. Very important point also made during this session is the need to integrate a suite of tools and having an approach that would allow for different tools to be used. One size doesn't fit all, and that calls for a very flexible approach. Also, an approach that would be future-proof in the sense that our systems are moving targets. And we need to make sure that we can integrate the changes ahead so that our assessments would remain accurate and relevant. In terms of an environmental risk assessment of pesticides, there again, the importance of adopting a systems-based approach was very clear. And also integrating real-life conditions. And so in that sense, the role of monitoring data has been underscored. It is really important that we optimize the use of available data. Too many data are not fully used currently, and making use of the different tools that are available. The good news is that the current regulatory framework does allow for this change. So there's no need for any new regulation or change to the regulation. Plant health, we had a very rich session there as well, emphasizing the need to take into consideration the global scale and how trade may affect health of plants and pests. But a lot of work to ensure a better preparedness of countries through horizon scannings, identification of hotspots for emergence of pests, and surveillance systems that are still lagging. The need to expand the toolbox to combat pests further. And of course, to build phytosanitary capacity and raise awareness in member states. The last session was on animal welfare, and there, of course, animal welfare is perceived as a public good by itself, but there was a strong consensus on the need to reframe animal welfare also, and make it a full dimension of sustainability. That was really a key point of this session, and also the link between animal welfare and antimicrobial resistance. This link is very often underestimated. There was an interesting conversation around technology and how we could optimize technology to develop sustainable animal farming systems, although there was an equity question there on access to this technology for farmers. Clearly, farmers are ready for change, but it was felt that the change could be driven by consumers, and there would be an area for improvement there. In terms of conclusions, I think we concur, and I'm already repeating what previous sessions previous rapporteurs have said. We acknowledge that environmental health, plant health, animal welfare, and health are integral parts of the food safety and sustainability. So this One Health approach is fully supported by this track, and the need to implement a more holistic and cross-sectorial approaches, which led us to three main recommendations for this track. One is to transition clearly to more integrated cross-sectoral and collaborative health assessments. The other one is to ensure engagement with relevant actors and stakeholders at a very early stage. And the third point, which is really important, is that we need to take action now, and we can take action now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berth, and I hope you agree with me that those messages and those recommendations emerging from the One Planet track are incredible for us again to be able to take those recommendations back and start acting on them quickly, because it is about acting now. It's not about sitting and waiting and gathering more information. We have lots of information, we have lots of expertise, we have great scientists, we have great policymakers, we have a really complex policy environment to navigate into the future. And it's really down to us to take our responsibility in making sure that we take that culture, that opportunity, and create that mindset shift to tackle the problems of the future. I'm now going to hand you over to the video for the final track, Many Ways. Thank you.
Risk assessors must keep pace with the latest advancements to ensure food safety assessments remain fit for purpose. We looked at new assessment methodologies and how they might be implemented. This is the focus of Many Ways.
In the first session, we explored the role of artificial intelligence and big data in the future risk assessments and the possible opportunities and challenges that lie ahead.
Our second session focused on those challenges associated with assessing combined exposure to multiple chemicals. We explored how we can break down regulatory silos in order to advance our current methodologies.
In our third thematic session, we focused on implementing alternatives to animal testing. The fourth session focused on advancing our methodologies for chemical risk assessments, learning from advancements in the field of endocrine disruptors.
Changes to microbiome structure can have important effects on animal, human and soil health. In this final thematic session, we discussed how we can integrate knowledge of these interactions into our risk assessments.
We are very honoured to introduce Christine Nellemann, the head of department of the DTU National Food Institute. Christine will report on the outcomes of the Many Ways track and present recommendations for further action. Please welcome Christine on stage.
Good morning here from Brussels. So, from the artificial intelligence and big data session, we have these keywords for you. Big data covering food systems are not yet fully exploited. So we need a proper infrastructure and data governance to avoid possible misuses and biases in existing data sets and new models. We need to enhance trust. Data science and AI literacy across domains in educational programs is needed to improve the understanding of risk assessments where AI solutions are employed. Together with adequate testing and explainability of these models, this will enhance the public trust in AI models. And in terms of sustainability, the environmental impact of the computational resources needed to execute AI models needs to be considered. And furthermore, low and middle-income countries that do not have access to those resources could be left behind in adoption of such AI technology. From the combined exposure to multiple chemicals session, there is a sense of maturity as well as a sense of urgency in this field, urgency to move forward. We need to develop roadmaps for regulatory implementation across regulations and across exposure routes. We need to identify relevant mixtures. The most important sources of exposures to unintentional chemical mixtures are expected from food and consumer products. So these regulatory domains should have the highest priority for the screening and identification of relevant mixtures. And we should build on complementarity. it is recognized that one-fits-all approach does not seem feasible, and that different methods should be used in a complementary way to address the different levels of uncertainty and variability within the different regulatory domains. But we need to move forward. Within the new approach methodology session, we have harmonization of roadmaps that's needed to resolve silos among the various regulatory sectors. And this requires cooperation and engagement with academia, industry, and regulators, which are key to the implementation and integration of NAMs in the risk assessment process. We have reached a turning point within these NAMs, where the focus has shifted to implementation as opposed to validation of the scientific endpoints. So this focus of attention on the integration of NAMs in risk assessment processes, and that is demonstrated as a trust within a maturing community. Mutual acceptance of data enables the integration of NAMs in the risk assessment guidelines. So NAM-based data should be harmonized, integrated, and accessible for sharing. From the endocrine disruptor session, we have that extrapolation and integration of data across mammalian and non-mammalian species can allow for increased knowledge and break down the walls. We can speed up the assessment by harmonization across legislation and validation. And it is crucial to speed up the assessment of endocrine disruptors and efficiently implement the one substance, one assessment goal. We want to fill in identified knowledge gaps by developing new and alternative methods also on species not covered yet fully. Develop new adverse outcome pathways, AOP networks, quantitative AOPs, and finalize ongoing ones and give more guidance on aspects that are currently not properly addressed. Within the microbiome session, we have that xenobiotics from diet, like food additives or contaminants, can impact the gut microbiome, and that messengers from this microbiome influence the host. That can be immune system influences and impact, gut health, inflammation, cancer, brain health, a lot of different endpoints. But we need to establish causality. And it was suggested to introduce the term a microbiome disrupting chemical as a substance which changes the microbiota at relevant doses and causes health effects in the host or progeny. And we should develop new, validated study methods in vitro and in vivo for systematic assessment of the microbiome and the related effects in the host. So to sum up from all these 5 very interesting sessions, we have that all sessions showed a strong interconnectivity actually. AI tools were used in NAMs and mixtures. NAMs were being used for mixtures, for endocrine disruptor research, as well as for microbiome research. We need to ensure trust and acceptance. All new methodological developments have the common challenge of obtaining trust and acceptance, where the new methods are often subject to a much higher scrutiny than compared to the traditional methods. But of course, we need to ensure the trust and acceptance. And the importance of data-driven approaches cannot be understated. It is about data, but it's also about data curation, data integration, and data sharing. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share these keywords from this very interesting track. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nelman, and I would also ask you to join me in a round of applause to thank our other track rapporteurs, Professor Lynn Fuhr, Dr. Francesca Branca, and Dr. Frank Berth as well. So fantastic, thank you so much. So one of my jobs is to keep everybody on time, but I didn't have to work very hard this morning because all of the track rapporteurs kept to time, and I'm going to keep to time, and I'm going to straight away go into the second part of our first session, which is our moderated panel discussion. So I would now like to introduce you to our moderator. You met her earlier on this week. Her name is Rose O'Donovan. She's going to moderate the panel discussion this morning. She was the editor of, or she has been the editor of AgriFacts since March 2010, having previously served as a deputy editor on the agriculture publication for nearly 3 years. Prior to working as a journalist, she dealt with the international relations on the EU satellite navigation programme at the Galileo joint undertaking. Hailing from a farming background in West Cork, where I'm also from, Rose has a keen interest in the evolution of Irish and European agriculture and trade policy. Rose, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you very much indeed, Pamela, for that very warm welcome. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this panel discussion, which continues this very important debate on the theme of safe and sustainable food systems. How can we get there? As Pam said, my name is Rose O'Donovan, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brussels-based publication AgriFacts. I'm delighted to be back here on stage on the final day of this one conference, Health, Environment, Society. Hope you all have enjoyed this rich and fulfilling debate that's been going on since Tuesday afternoon. And all credit, has to be said, is due to Dr. Bernard Earle and his fantastic EFSA team who have put this impressive show on the road. The theme of this session is One Health, delivering integrated health assessments that advance food safety. And we're going to continue to delve deeper into this topic with the track rapporteurs that you've just heard from, with the addition of Dr. Stephen Musser from the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call on stage the track rapporteurs and invite Dr. Musser also to join us on the podium. So please be seated, one and all. Thank you. Welcome. Now, just by way of introduction, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go through just my panelists, just to give you a little bit of background on our speakers. Frank, you're waiting patiently, so I'll start with you. Welcome again, Dr. Frank Berth, who's, of course, joining us online. Just by way of introduction, Frank, I'll introduce you as the One Health practitioner at the World Bank, working on public health issues across the agriculture, environment, water and public health sectors. Frank is also a member of the Lancet One Health Commission and was previously head of the Animal Health and Welfare Unit at the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, from 2007 until 2016. So you're a homegrown expert, Frank, is that correct? Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. On my left, we have Dr. Francesca Branca, who is Director of the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety at the World Health Organization in Geneva since February 2020. Lynn Fuhr, who is, of course, the Professor of Food and Society in the School of Natural Environmental Sciences in Newcastle University in the UK. Dr. Christina Nelman, who has a research background in endocrine disruption and has headed a toxicology and risk assessment division for 4 years before taking over as director of the National Food Institute at the Technical University of Denmark. And joining us at the end, welcome Dr. Stephen Musser, who is the Deputy Center Director for Scientific Operations at the US Food and Drug Administration Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, the CFSAN. And Dr. Musser has a degree in biology from Millersville University and a PhD in medicinal chemistry from the University of Baltimore, Maryland, Baltimore. That's Baltimore in the United States and not the fishing village where both Pam and I are not so far away from where we grew up. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to my panelists this morning. So the energy is buzzing in the room and we have a lot to get through in the next 50 minutes or so. But before we get cracking, just allow me just to go through the running order, let's say. We're going to have a panel discussion until around 10:05. Once Dr. Stephen Musser has delivered his introductory remarks, there'll be a Q&A session between myself and the speakers. after which point I will open it up to the floor for comments and questions which will come in via our platform. You can, of course, contribute to this commentary by using the event application's chat function. When you pose a question, remember to introduce yourself and to whom the question is directed, and I will relay that to them. We aim to wrap up the panel discussion at around 10:05, after which point my fellow Cork woman, Dr. Pam Byrne, will return on stage and briefly sum up the key take-home messages before we wrap up part 1 of this final plenary session. So Dr. Musser, let's start with you. I would invite you to deliver your 5-minute impulse statement, so whenever you're ready, and we have a clock in front of you, so the floor is yours, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. This has been an incredibly useful meeting. I've learned a great deal, and I also appreciate the opportunity to give a perspective from the US and the FDA. It was very fascinating for me to listen to all 4 of the summary comments today, because they all touched on something that I wanted to highlight that I noticed in this meeting and that I've been noticing for some time. And that is the availability of data. When I talk to people here and I said, what do you need? What is the thing that you really need to advance what you're trying to do? And they all said very clearly, data. Not only my data, but access to data as a whole. And while One Health is not new, and we all agree that it's important to understand what happens in human health and environment and other areas of the world and the global systems, we don't share the data. We don't share between, we don't share within, and we have in many ways not advanced beyond where we have been for decades, where we keep everything in a silo and private in many ways. So if we're going to have collaboration, which people have been talking about and I agree with, then we really need to have much more data sharing and trust about how we share that data. Additionally, the data surveillance has to be consistent and balanced across the sectors. And I'll give you an example. When we first started to talk about using whole genome sequencing to replace pulse field gel electrophoresis for surveillance of foodborne pathogens in the US, most of the funding and almost all of the data was concentrated on human health. So the result of that was we ended up knowing that a lot of people were sick, but we didn't know why. We knew that they were sick from the same thing. We didn't know how that happened. And by combining all the WGS data that we had from human clinical health, providing a lot more funding and a lot more data streams for looking at environmental, food, and animal pathogens, and combining all that information where everyone could look at it. It wasn't private, it was all public. That is when we started making real strides towards understanding how food became contaminated. Not only how it became contaminated, but how we could provide preventive controls that would help us get to the point of stopping the foodborne illness from happening to begin with. And I cannot stress how important it is. There's a lot of scariness about sharing this kind of data, but it works. And it works and it improves people's health. And I can show you multiple examples of that. I'd like to also note that this is important for sustainability, the availability of data. We tend to have really great ideas, but as a human race, we've made a very consistent bad choices in saying these are good, this would be great to do and great to implement, but then we don't have the data and the discussion about how we do that across fields. And we end up making some horrible mistakes. And also, the law of unintended consequences comes into play, where we say this would be a great idea and we haven't thought it through, we don't have the data, and then something that we really don't want to have happen occurs. So with that, I'd like to not take up all the time, but just make one final suggestion. That we move away from the old saying, I can't share my data. There's no way I can do it, and we move towards asking the question, how can I share my data? How can I make my data available? And how can I have it used in an integrated process across systems? So with that, I hope I was clear within my time, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Could Christine, do you have a reaction to what Dr. Musser just said there about data sharing, the availability of data to feed into that transdisciplinary approach that we spoke about earlier that perhaps Lynn spoke about in more detail, actually. But any reaction, any initial reaction to what Stephen just said there?
Yes, several thoughts actually. We have in Denmark for more than 20 years had this central outbreak management group going across hospitals, risk assessors as us, and then the food agencies. And they meet up every week actually to compare data from the clinics, from the hospitalized patients to the food inspection data, and actually to do that, and the whole genome sequencing have led on to that in a huge way. But definitely we need to share data. We need also to share data before we maybe publish it, so the whole genome sequencing data is just out there for people to get into it. And that's actually a new way of thinking, both in academia, but it should be a new way of thinking also from regulatory sides, from industry sides. So yes, I can totally agree. We need to share data.
I'm going to go to Lynn in a moment, but Stephen, just going back to you from the FDA perspective, what are the main sort of like, you say that it's the question of data sharing is a major sort of hindrance, or that there's, you know, shortcomings in that respect. What could be done between, is it between USDA, is it FDA? What are sort of like the main bodies that need to sort of get more interconnected to resolve that issue in your perspective?
So there has to be a commitment, regardless of who or what agency is involved, there has to be a commitment in being willing to have a discussion about sharing the data. That's how we've made every advance in data sharing, where USDA, EPA, FDA, no matter which groups are involved, start the discussion with, we want to approach this in how we share the data and how we analyze the data, understanding that the needs are great across all the regulatory bodies and even the non-regulatory bodies. There's an enormous amount of academic research that comes out of the public sharing of this data that's actually beneficial to providing advice to the agencies that are charged with regulation. So access to a wide database of information is not only important for the regulatory bodies, but it's also important for people providing advice to us.
Yep, exactly, and that was one of the points that came out of the first panel discussion that I moderated at, this idea of out of silos, and just to sort of, I suppose, escape that phenomenon to embrace the data that's available. Lynn, you wanted to jump in there with some of your points.
Yes, I did. I guess my question is, what data from a disciplinary perspective are we sharing? At the moment, I'm seeing a lot of sharing of natural science data, epidemiological data. I think there's also a big role in sharing some of that data about values, and also integrating that into the modeling, into predicting different outcomes. And I don't think we're quite there yet. So this requires more openness, more collaboration, and possibly the development of new languages which we can share across disciplines so we have a mutual understanding. I know the word holistic is interpreted in different ways in different disciplines, but at the end of the day, what we want is a holistic food system where we can all contribute data, we can all analyze it, and it can be put in the public domain in a way which is also transparent. So developing interfaces where it can be interrogated, for example, not only by scientists, but also the public.
Thanks for that, Lynn. You wanted to get in there yourself?
Yeah, no, I cannot agree more with you, Dr. Musser. We have invested perhaps a lot more in human epidemiology, so the human health data are solid, a bit less in veterinary epidemiology, but we don't have as much in terms of environmental indicators, and above all, we lack perhaps that framework that allows us to connect. These data are not necessarily, they don't speak to each other. So we need to have, first of all, much clearer set of indicators. Then we need to see how they are combined. And then we need to have adequate investment and capacities to collect them. So I don't think it's a fundamental issue of not willing to share, but I think we're lacking some of the instruments.
And as said by Lynn as well, you speak different languages from what I can understand as an outsider looking in. But listen, I'm just going to go back now to Frank, who's online, just for a moment. Frank, I wanted to bring it all back to the theme of this conference, the whole point that we're here since Tuesday afternoon, these 4 days of discussion on One Health, environment, and on society. So my question to you, Frank, is what can we learn from this One Health approach and all of the principles underpinning it that we've discussed so learnedly since Tuesday afternoon when it comes specifically to this question of food and feed safety assessments? So Frank, what's your perspective on that?
Thank you, Rose. Thank you very much. If you allow me a few seconds on data, maybe before going to your question, I think Lynn's point is really important. And when we talk about data, we usually have those very well-defined data. But what we've learned with COVID-19 is that it has been the most documented event ever, probably with reports, records, testimonies all over the place. And I think it's a good opportunity for us also to rethink what we mean by data and how we use them. So there is a real momentum. To your question, I think there again, Stephen was saying that yes, One Health has been known for a while, sitting there on our tables 15, 20 years ago. And I think that what we've seen lately is a coming of age of One Health, which is great news. It comes with a real promising harvest of promises in a way, because of this culture that has been developed and nurtured by a small community around collaboration, cooperation, and transdisciplinarity. I think that it is time to embrace the concept, to embrace the principles that this community has developed, and I think this is where this conference comes really timely.
And you mentioned there COVID-19. Do you think that the worldwide pandemic, that it kind of created an impetus for us to discuss One Health in that perspective? You said that there was a lot of collaboration there. We've seen ourselves, I mean, even between jurisdictions. You said that this concept of One Health has been sort of sitting on a shelf for the past 15 to 20 years. But really, I suppose the COVID-19 pandemic has brought this idea, the One Health perspective, the One Health approach, the holistic approach that Lynn referred to, really brought it into the center stage, right? So what can we learn from something like COVID-19 going forward when it comes to food and feed assessments, sort of taking that collaborative approach and transferring it to the likes of, you know, the specific idea of what we're here for today, this risk assessment idea?
I think, yes. I mean, clearly, if you look at the past 2 years and leaders groups like the G7 or the G20, One Health is now in the declarations, and under the Italian presidency, the Matera Declaration was very explicit about One Health. But also mainstream media. You read, I do read Le Monde regularly, and One Health is now in those mainstream media. So that is quite clear. What it brings is this interconnection, the connection between people, between animals, and the ecosystems that they share, and it brings a whole new perspective on food systems. And of course, food systems as a driver of change and a driver of health, and food systems as also being driven by other drivers, by the climate change, by migrations, by conflict and violence. In a way, we see the situation in Ukraine and the food security crisis that we're facing now. So the main lesson is this interconnectivity and the short-sighted approach when we try to fix problems in a very narrow, siloed manner, because we never go to the root of those problems. And I think this is the other lesson that One Health is bringing. It allows us to go to the very source of the problem and tackle that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Frank. Lynn, I'm going to turn to you. Your research explores the interactions between social science and the biological, environmental, and engineering domains. What can you tell us about that? What are sort of some of the key elements that you're discovering in your research field, for example?
I'm going to start off going back maybe 5 years when we were looking at technological innovation in the agri-food system. And in the UK, I'm sorry I don't have the European figures, 93% of those innovations were never adopted because the end users, the farmers, either didn't want them, they didn't see the value in them, and they couldn't use them. So eliminating that human element from understanding how to innovate meant that the innovations never delivered. So in my own research, for example, I would consider in the area of ecosystem services, not only the economic value, the impacts on biodiversity, but some of the cultural values that people place on landscapes, and also the food that they produce. So it needs to be taken together. From an engineering perspective, how do we develop interventions to prevent flooding in those landscapes, which are also acceptable to those communities who are affected? So we must, I think, bring society into our technological innovation processes to make sure they're acceptable, but we must also understand what science wants in terms of questions to be asked of scientific processes, and in terms of the impacts, the impact pathways and the outcomes of science once we develop interventions. Mm-hmm. And one final point, we know that people's behaviors will influence not only the emergence of a food risk, but also how they respond to the interventions that we put in place to mitigate or prevent that food risk. Understanding that and feeding it back through the entirety of the food system is key to making things better.
Thanks for that, Lynn. I wanted to come back to Francesco. In your conclusions, Francesco, coming out of the thematic discussions during the week, you said that we must embed the One Health concept into sectoral policies. Could you maybe delve into that a tiny bit for me?
I mean, One Health is a great concept. It's been there for many years. We're starting to articulate, and then it's about human health, animal health, and planetary health. But we're describing the mechanism without necessarily deciding what needs to be done to prevent those negative interactions. So for example, looking at the food system, we know it works both ways. So the way we produce food is going to affect the health of the animals, the welfare of the animals, and the health of the planet. We need to be very specific to describe what's happening, and we need to basically establish policies, actions, and investments that prevent those effects. And vice versa, we know that it's going to fire back. If we don't do that, it's going to eventually affect our environment and make it basically impossible to live in the future. And it's going to affect One Health, as our own health, as the pandemic basically indicated. The fact of the matter is that although we have this concept at country level, there's no basically concrete change in the sectoral policies to make this happen. There's not even a governance system. So we talk about intersectorality, but it doesn't work in practice. So I think we need to be extremely specific of what it means, for example, in agricultural policies with a One Health approach. And this is going to be about what food gets produced, how it gets produced, the use of pesticides, all of that need to be very clearly indicated and articulated in the specific context.
Sure. And we'll hear from Nathalie Schaz in a moment from the European Commission in the second panel discussion, where I'm sure she'll delve into the farm to fork strategy and this future legislative proposal on sustainable food systems. That's perhaps for later on. But Stephen, I'm turning to you from the US jurisdiction. As I say, here in Europe, we're talking at the moment the farm to fork strategy, the idea, the horizontal legislative framework that is coming on stream at the end of 2023, and a sustainable approach to food systems. What sort of discussions are you guys having in the United States, stateside, about this? Because if I recall correctly, when the USDA went through the farm to fork strategy, ye weren't that impressed with our policy direction, let's say. There was a lot of talk about food security issues, a lot of talk about food prices going through the roof, and now we've got a different geopolitical landscape. So what sort of lessons, how is the US embracing One Health from a regulatory point of view? Can you tell us?
I think probably the most impactful outcome of some of this is that we are working and living in a global economy and a global food supply, where even small perturbations can have dramatic impacts. I'll just give one recent example is with infant formula and the conflict in Ukraine right now, and the unavailability of, or the limited availability of sunflower oil for production of infant formula. It's a critical aspect, and so we're thinking now about what are these supply chain issues that need to be addressed globally for the safety and health of not only our citizens, but the global citizens. And how we as a regulatory agency can be looking not only at those supply chain issues, but also the underlying causes or issues that might be associated with their availability or their safety. So it goes beyond just what we think in the US. It's actually a very global, try to look at these things. And I'll just give you one example. We've realized the importance of agricultural water and its impact on food safety throughout the world. And if you look at global issues with warming and changes in the environment, you can see how that impacts agricultural water, not only for crops, but also municipal water that people are using. And there's just a very significant trickle-down effect in all of these areas that I think we think we understand, but we actually don't. And a lot more emphasis needs to be put there.
And as you say, a very different geopolitical context that we find ourselves in since February 24th. Christina, if I can turn to you for a moment. Picking up on Stephen's point there, we have different contexts, be it geopolitical, be it environmental, the climate crisis. How can we ensure that our food and feed safety assessment, that it remains agile, that it's quick to adapt, and that it remains fit for purpose?
Very interesting question. I would say yes, in some areas it's food security we are most focusing on, others it's food safety, others again it's sustainability. But seen from a global perspective, it's all together, right? So I would come back to that. We need to collaborate. We need to do this together to actually stay agile. I think within the academia, within the risk assessment organizations, we have a lot of agility. But if we do not take into account the consumers, the environment, all this, it actually, the solutions are not going to work out there, right? It's not going to really make the green transition if the consumers are not into buying the new food products, or it's actually not really good for the environment. So a lot of life science cycles assessment, a lot of food safety experts are needed together with the social sciences and humanities. So actually, I think from this point where I have been working within this food safety area for more than 20 years, it's extremely exciting period that we now go into a lot of different disciplines and collaborations.
Do you see tensions there, though? Do you see trade-offs? Do you see tensions? You talk about consumers getting involved. These are big ticket items like sustainability, food security. It's all about food affordability at the moment, given the current context that we find ourselves in. Food prices are going up. So where do you see those tensions emerging, and how do you soften them?
Yeah, because of course there are tensions, and we need to be respectful. that I can come in and say, well, food safety should always be top of mind, and others say, well, we need to be able to pay for the food in the first place and be able to buy it. So yes, there are tensions. I think that we should discuss these as well, that we should be open to the different angles and the different perspectives. And hopefully we get some peace time at some point that we can actually discuss these things without having crises to solve all the time. Because I think that's what communication and building trust.
Thanks
to
for that.
also listen to tensions.
Thank you for that, Christina. Frank, I'm going to go to you. Picking up on Christine's point about tensions, the idea of tensions between food safety, food security, food sustainability. Do you see that there are trade-offs there? And how do we embrace the broader concept of sustainability then into the assessment process?
There is clearly tensions. I mean, you can't have an ecosystem with multiple dimensions without tensions and trade-offs. And by the way, we often talk about our planetary boundaries, but we need also to keep in mind the social foundations that go with them, and food is part of the social foundation. It makes sense to me to bring those multiple dimensions of food safety, food security, affordability, and to put all these issues on the table. And there will be difficult choices to make. I think our risk assessments become really relevant and pertinent as we bring those elements into the complex equation. And that brings me to a point that has been made several times, but I think it's worth repeating that. We need the participation of people. We need participation of citizens, because at the end of the day, those are political choices. Those are part of our societies. So this element is extremely important.
Okay, thank you for that, Frank.
Maybe a final point. Sorry for that. That goes maybe for a more porous concept and definition of food safety. I think the food safety we've been thinking about for the past 50 years is really challenged by the situation we're facing, and the need to take those multiple dimensions into consideration, and that somehow brings again this One Health into the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for that intervention. Francesco, picking up on what Frank just said there, so we're talking about some of the key challenges, excuse me, and the opportunities in this transition, this more integrated, more collaborative approach to health assessments. What do you see there as for example, a challenge and an opportunity in moving towards that?
The challenge is that unfortunately the food security situation is becoming worse, because we live in a time of perfect storm of conflict, climate change, the effect of the pandemic. We're about to release jointly with a group of United Nations that every year produce a report on the state of food security and nutrition on the 6th of July, a new report. And this is going to say that unfortunately the numbers are growing. You know, we have an additional 150 million people who are going to be in food insecurity. And the people who cannot afford a healthy diet, again, increasing, over 3 billion, now 3 billion.1. So that's really the enormous challenge we have. The opportunity is that we need to have clearly a green recovery there. The opportunity is that, you know, everybody is understanding that this is completely unsustainable. And so we need some radical transformation. They need to be mapped. As we said in the action track, some of the investments, they need to be realigned. I mean, the new, basically, a way of conceiving how subsidies, and I hope that the World Bank and other financial institutions will be helping there to really advise government to reconsider the way they're investing in the food system. The money is there, it simply needs to be used differently in order to make the food more affordable to more people.
Mm-hmm. And I guess here in Europe, we're just after the Common Agricultural Policy, the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. And one might argue that the One Health approach was not really embraced or embedded in that sort of fundamental policy, which takes up quite a huge part of the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that European policy is really shining. Of course, we need to see it in practice, and I think the One Health approach is a new challenge. But for this, I mean, the United Nations Group has created a collaboration called the Quadripartite, bringing together WHO, the FAO, the UN Environmental Programme, the Organization for Animal Health, and we have produced a global action plan on One Health. And we hope that that is going to inspire some of these regional and country policies, because it's based on the good practices and on the understanding of how we should have a paradigm shift.
Okay, thank you for that, Francesco. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go to some of the comments coming in just from the platform. So let me see. The first one comes in from Stefan Bronzoir, and the question is, could the panel comment on greenwashing practices? It seems that industry is faster than regulators to win citizens over. Lynn, can I turn to you on greenwashing practices?
Yes, I think there is greenwashing, but not all industry engages in it, so it's not a ubiquitous practice. We regulate for nutrition claims. Why not regulate for sustainability claims? We can generate information through our supply chains using LCA, other methods. Why not combine nutrition labeling and sustainability labeling at the point of sale in a way which is regulated and trustworthy? Because at the moment, it's the Wild West.
Okay, thanks for that, Lynn. Would you like to come in there, Christina, about greenwashing practices and how industry engages in that?
Actually, I think there's a big pushback from consumers and civil society on the greenwashing. So I think the industry is quite careful, but maybe it started out that way. And I know in Denmark we are working on actually a climate kind of stamp on food as well. So, but a lot of data going into that and a lot of discussions on how to do this. So yes, need a lot of competences to do things like that.
Okay, thanks for that. Another comment from Joachim Rutters. Everyone seems to agree that a paradigm shift is required and we need to get out of the silos and work together on many levels. Given the agreement on the ultimate goals, now this is a nice question, what should be the first small practical step to get us there? Stephen, what do you think? The first small step just to get us on the pathway towards this transition?
One of the easiest things to do is to first define what it is you're trying to solve, what problem, and there's lots of them. We saw many of them today, so you could even start with risk assessment. So just making this up, let's say that we needed to look at how we improve risk assessment for chemical exposure, pick your favorite chemical, or prioritization of risk assessment and chemical exposure. What data do you need to make that happen? What do you have now? What additional information would you use? How would you get to your final endpoint, and what are the things in between that are barriers to getting there? So I think at least when you look at this systems approach and understanding what the problem is you're trying to solve will get you to helping policy and leadership say, I need you to do this. I need you to focus on this and make it a priority as opposed to just not having a focused effort.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Christine, you wanted to come in there?
Just some very basic things like food waste and food loss, right? 1/3 of what food produced is actually wasted. So to start there, and that's the whole production from primary to the retailers and the food processing to the consumers. So that's one thing. More sustainable diets, and there are people coming out and scientists coming out with how can we assess sustainability in diet. So that's a way to go forward. The food production, how to reuse water. We use extremely lot of water in food production. So there are actually very many ways where we as single players private persons, but also in our capacity from industries or science can do a lot.
They're sort of the low-hanging fruits, as we would refer to them as. Thanks for that, Christina. Frank, you had your hand up there. You wanted to come in on the small step. We agree on a paradigm shift. We agree on the need for a paradigm shift in this transition. Christina outlined some small steps that we could all take as individuals, as citizens, as consumers. What do you say to that?
Well, since this conference is organized by EU agencies, I thought we could talk to our agencies, and maybe the first step is to work on the fragmentation that we have because of institutional arrangements, because of the underlying regulations, and the way the landscape has been organized. But if I remember correctly, the agencies, they've been able to work together, like on vector-borne diseases, for example, with a strong collaboration between ECDC and EFSA, or antimicrobial resistance, where EMA, ECDC, and EFSA work together. I think these are good examples, and maybe a space where we should push our agencies to join forces and find a more systematic way of working together. That would be a nice first step.
Thank you for that, Frank. And I'm just going to come to a comment by Fran Prusia, who makes the following point, echoing what you just said, Frank. A proposal to foster the interplay between the different agencies, including the Joint Research Centre, so that they can become true enablers of the way the European Parliament and the Council make decisions. Francesco, I might pick you up on that. This idea of a collaborative approach between the agencies, including the Joint Research Centre, so that they can enable those decisions coming from the institutions.
Absolutely.
It's a no-brainer, really, Francesco, isn't it?
No, well, the theory is great, but the practice is complicated. We were discussing, for example, about different assessment methodologies that need to be aligned between agencies, and they need to speak to one another. But also, I mean, the context of One Health, a lot happened last year. We established together with FAO a joint, and the other agencies, a joint expert panel on One Health. And at the same time, there were, several other initiatives on One Health going in parallel. So, the fact that there is such an interest is generating many initiatives, but then they need to come together somehow. So, having a good system of governance, which is lean enough to be able to make those alignment. I think Europe is in a very good position because, having highlighted at a strategic level and having, all these different elements and tools, I think it could be a good model for the world. But clearly there needs to be an overall strategic vision. I think, the framework that's going to be developed, for example, on sustainable food system is going to be particularly important for that.
Do you think that's going to be a game changer, Francesco?
I think it can be a game changer because we don't really have, much of that in other parts of the world. And I think, also in terms of the power behind it of, the many countries, the large academic community that is going to do that, I think that could be definitely a game changer, yeah.
Thank you for that, Francesco. Lynn, since Brexit, we're talking about different jurisdictions. I wasn't going to bring up the B word, but now, now that it's sort of the flow of the conversation, this idea of a collaborative approach, do you feel increasingly isolated? Is there still scope for collaboration? You're obviously coming from the social sciences, Professor of Food and Society, looking at nutrition in the broader perspective, the societal perspective. How does that work in practice? And can you still engage with your European counterparts?
I would love to continue collaborating with my European counterparts, and I hope that's going to be possible. I'm sure we'll find a way to do it. I'd like to just come back to an earlier point, though, if I may,
please,
which is how we catalyze transdisciplinary cooperation. The fact that we're sitting here in this meeting, that EFSA is driving a discussion about that, is the first pragmatic step to doing this. So I think we will do it. And that will mean collaboration at the global level. It will mean collaboration at the regional level, but also remember that food systems aren't just global. There are very local micro food systems. What we're looking at is a system of systems. So to get this right, we're going to have to engage at all of those different levels, whether that's pan-European, whether it's global, or whether it's around a small village community. And none of that research, I think, is off the table.
Okay, thanks for that, Lynn. I like how Professor Patrick Wall is going to throw a cat among the pigeons now with a very succinct question. I'll put it to Stephen just to start the ball rolling. Is it game over for livestock production?
Not in the U.S.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Professor Wall?
I wouldn't even bring that up.
Okay, so this discussion that we've had during the week about moving towards a more sustainable diet, that we all have a role to play there. So I suppose you're saying not in the US. Christine, what do you say, coming from the Danish perspective and the European idea?
No, it's not game over for livestock as I see it either. But of course we are going to change our diet, and it's going to be more balanced, I think, in the future. But we do see within local communities, urban communities, young communities, that there's a big game changer right now. So let's see how that evolves. Yes, interesting.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Professor Wall. An interesting question.
And taking a global perspective, clearly livestock is not game over. In many countries and regions, this would be the only activity that we can even think about. And so we need to have a really balanced and approach to that question, not northern-centric.
Okay, thanks for that, Frank. And coming from some of the discussions earlier on, or some of the reports back, there's a lot of chatter about the sustainable livestock production, animal health and welfare being central to that production line. Just one final point from the auditorium and those online. An interesting point from Fulvio Barizzone to the panel. To pursue the One Health objective, should the different EU agencies be put together in a unique body? So this idea of a collaborative approach. Frank, you're giggling there. Let's go to you first. What do you think? Is there scope for something like that? Or is that really kind of like never going to, it's not on the cards, something like that?
Oh, well, I can't answer that question, but I don't think this would be an easy step to make. Sure. That would be a huge step. I don't think One Health means everybody in the same room on a permanent basis. I think that we need to leave a lot of flexibility and fluidity to One Health. Our experience in low middle-income countries is that when One Health becomes a straitjacket, it doesn't work. So it's good to have an EFSA, it's good to have an ECDC, it's good to have an EMA, and these envy agencies. And it's probably good to have a mechanism in place so that they can work together and co-produce, but not necessarily putting them all together. That would be my observation.
Okay, thanks for that, Frank. I hope that answers your question. Fulvio, so the idea of a lot of cross-fertilization, a lot of transdisciplinary cooperation and collaboration, but keeping perhaps the remits separate. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, I am conscious of time. As Pam said, we're going to stick to our agenda. So I'm going to wrap up things there with our panel discussion. I would like to thank my panelists for this very lively and interesting debate. My thanks to Dr. Frank Berth, Dr. Francesco Branca, Professor Lynn Frewer, Dr. Christine Nelman, and Dr. Stephen Musser at the end. I would now invite my panelists to be seated in the auditorium. And now, thank you very much indeed. And now I would invite Dr. Pam Byrne to join me on stage to deliver, I suppose, some concluding comments, Pam, on that first session. And I look forward to seeing you all, ladies and gentlemen, after the coffee break for the second panel discussion. Pam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rose. And what a challenge, but what a fantastic discussion. that we've just witnessed and some great recommendations coming out of the 4 tracks for the conference. There's no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure in your mind, that the challenges we are currently facing, and indeed will continue to face, are complex. There are many aspects to this complexity, and this conference has dived into those aspects through various different tracks. But some of my key take-home messages from our discussion this morning and over the last couple of days, and there are just 3. The first is be inclusive, engaging all voices, especially citizens. We need to break down silos, we need to be collaborative, we need to work in partnership at all levels with all stakeholders. And this leads to my second message. Resources and appropriate governance and regulatory structures are critical. It takes time to understand and reflect on what we know, what we don't know, and from this identify what we need, making sure that we consider and understand any of the unintended consequences that may arise. And then we need to figure out how do we get it. And this brings me to my final message. Be open. Be open with your data, but most importantly, be open in your mind. We need to be open to new ways of doing things. Because as it was said this morning, it's not business as usual. Now it's time to take action. And this conference has given us a huge opportunity to identify what some of those actions are going to be. So I'm not sure about you, but I'm up for the challenge. I'd like to invite you to take up the challenge and consider what your role as an individual is and your responsibility in helping navigate this complexity of the future. So that brings us to the end of the first part of our closing session. It has been my delight to co-chair this session and really to listen to the really exciting and interesting ideas that have emerged. I hope you agree. So I would like to now thank all of you in the room and indeed all of those of you online who've stayed with us. And it's great to see so many people here in the room and indeed so many people online. But I would also like to thank all of the contributors of this morning's session, and I look forward to the next session, which will convene in about 30 minutes. So I now invite you to take coffee, to reflect on some of what you've heard, have some more discussions about what you've heard, and maybe think about what you're going to do to embrace this opportunity that is now in front of us. Thank you very much.
We're going to have a great discussion really focusing on how to make this transition happen. We've already heard this morning about how difficult it is to think about making those change across the scales and also individually in terms of how each of us can take action. I work at the OECD, and in my role there, I lead the work on agri-food trade and markets, and we've had a long-standing research program on food systems. When we think about how we engage with our stakeholders, OECD's mission is better policies for better lives. So what we do is we generate data and evidence to try to help inform policymakers as they're navigating these complex challenges. And obviously, the topics we're talking about today are among the most complicated. On the food system side, the way we have come at it in terms of the work that I lead is we think about it in terms of a triple challenge. So we know that food systems have to provide food for a growing population into the future, and we've heard already that we're having challenges in that area in the previous session. We also know that we need to ensure livelihoods for all the workers and producers within the system in order to make that system function. And of course, what we're really focusing on more and more is how to do all of that in a sustainable way. So we're sort of trying to create policies and actions that are moving us in positive directions across those 3 areas. And what we know is that we've had both success stories in food systems, and I think it's important to remind ourselves that, in fact, in the 1960s, we were not sure that agricultural production was going to keep up with the demand from a growing population. But what we've seen in the past half century is that we've had population growth of double, but actually we've quadrupled the production of food. So in fact, that's a big success story. So I don't want us to lose sight of that. At the same time, we've had obviously big challenges. We know we have a big challenge with undernourishment. Also, we have health issues with overweight and obesity. We know that agriculture contributes to biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions. We have big challenges that we also need to be addressing. But what we've heard throughout this event is there's so many pieces to the question, so many levels, that there will be no silver bullet. What we have to do is we have to think about it from a systems perspective. And at the OECD, what we're interested in is the synergies and trade-offs across policies. So we know that policymakers have to take action within their specific domain. But we also know now, increasingly, as we've been hearing, we know that policymakers need to be cognizant of how the decisions they're making in their area have spillovers in other areas. And this is really, obviously, a key theme that we've been hearing at least all morning. One thing that's really important is that we need to be measuring outcomes, because measurement, one, can inform policymakers in terms of whether or not their policies are working, but measurement also is a way of communicating to other stakeholders. So it gives a kind of direction, a path that stakeholders can move towards if we know what we're trying to measure for our outcomes. So the big question is change, and how are we going to get to change? In the next lineup, we have 3 leaders in the field who are going to give us different perspectives of how we can actually think about moving this complex system so that it's fit for the future, so that we deal with these big global challenges that we all really care about and seem quite daunting. So just to give you a sense of how the next hour and a half will go, we'll have 3 speakers who each have about 10 minutes. Then we'll have another panel discussion. Rose will be back with us, and we'll have a group of eminent leaders again taking questions from Rose and also taking questions from people who are engaging through the app, so similar to what was done this morning. We'll have a quick wrap up, and then we'll have closing 12:30 or so. So that's the run of show, and I'm here as timekeeper and to give some wrap up. So what I'd like to do now is turn over to our first speaker, who is Sandra Gallina. She works with the EU Commission, where she's the Director General of the Directorate for Health and Food Safety. I was really interested when I was reading her biography that she also has a long experience in trade negotiations. So Sandra can talk about these issues around navigating complex international relationships when we're talking about these big global challenges. So I'd really like to welcome Sandra to the stage, and I'll pass the floor over to her. Welcome.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you to you all for being here in this beautiful event. So to all the guests here, but also the speakers, and I would say to all who follow us from the hybrid world, good morning, and thank you for attending this meeting. I have been picking up a few ideas of what you have been discussing. So first of all, my thanks go to all of you, because apparently there has been quite a lot of inspiring discussions and conversations on this issue. I have picked up that there are 2 words that are buzzing around, which is collaboration and multidisciplinary. I could hear them, I would say, in Leanne's introduction. By the way, anecdotally, I can say I was the first director in DG Trade who was dealing with sustainability. So we started this file, and it was quite a challenging one under Commissioner Malmström. COVID-19, many other imminent threats, the invasion and the aggression of Russia on Ukraine. So, you know, it's clear that the world is going through a phase where you feel more jittery, and you need to somehow collect yourself and think, what is the path that we want to follow? A very good word that Leanne used, the path. Social economic challenges, you know, the supply of food is at the moment, I would say, quite complex in terms of the supply chains. which is making food less affordable for the ones who perhaps have limitations even in their revenue. And this is particularly true in some parts of the world. I would like to underline for Europe, I don't see an issue of safety at the moment and of security. So, planet remains under pressure. We should not delay the green transition because, you know, I would say that all the issues that were there at the beginning of this mandate, meaning I would say climate change and all the issues that concern loss of biodiversity, the need of fertile lands, these are not luxuries of the few. There need to be certainly elements that we need to cherish for all. In my view, we need to stand to be steady and to stay the course because it's very important that we try to deal with the increase in temperatures in the world. In Italy these days, it's quite dramatic. The drought in the northern part of Italy is quite visible to all. And I would say that it's not only, you know, faraway countries that are challenged by the climate change. So we must act now. The challenge is that we cannot act in isolation, so there is also a global agenda that we need to bear in mind. And we also saw in these days here, from what I pick up, that there was this multidisciplinary awareness. We need to do it in a holistic way. This is what the Farm to Fork, I would say, is trying to do, is trying to collect the multidisciplinary wisdom on the different topics because, you know, we need to have sustainable use and management of natural resources. This has, of course, also social and economic implications. I would like to add that as of recently I've heard that perhaps Farm to Fork has too high an ambition. I don't think so. It's perhaps a legitimate concern given the situation we're in, but frankly, as I said, the fundamentals that gave us the idea for this approach are still there. Now, what is that I see? I see that there is a bit of a gap between our ambition and the reality, and I think that that gap should be filled by science. It's the main message that I have for all of you, science. Science is very important. I also would like to stress that in this new transition, all need to participate, so it's the producers, I would say the citizens as buyers, so all actors, including the retailers in between, need to be participating because, you know, frankly, we cannot put all the stress on one of the actors. All of us need to participate. And so technological innovation will be needed, and I will not bore you with several examples of how this can be done. So we go straight to digitalization, where I think a lot can be, I would say, done to scale up the findings, the scientific findings, and, you know, to make them, I would say, available to all the food actors. You know, there are many things that are being discussed at the moment. It's also the use of artificial intelligence and how all these elements can be helpful in areas such as, I would say, precision farming, or I would say clarity on the fertilization rate that is needed, and so on and so forth. So the consumers are also perhaps in need of a digital, I would say, support. Now, science and research has delivered very high quality results. I'm very proud to say that Europe has been financing massively areas of research that otherwise would not have had, I would say, such good support. Horizon Europe is a flagship instrument, so is LIFE, and I would like to say that towards a sustainable food system, these two tools have given results that show excellence, transparency, but also independence, which is very important, the independence of the scientific milieu. I go back to the cross-disciplinarity and to the fact that the Farm to Fork is demanding such cross-disciplinary action. And here I think that this EFSA conference has given a fascinating flavor of what it means to work with such a multidisciplinary approach. Topics like society, life, or the planet do demand this multidisciplinary approach. But I would like to end with a message that needs to be very clear to all of us. So, Leanne was talking about measure. She was being very diplomatic. Measure. To measure, you need science. I mean, science is what guarantees that the measure is recognized by all stakeholders, but also beyond Europe. Always remember that there is a global agenda out there. And science is crucial. I can say that with my experience on the vaccines, that, you know, had we not had good science, we would not have had good vaccines. So I'm a believer in science, and scientists saved us. What I tend to see is that in the face of complexity, which is the case for this topic, there's quite a lot of, there is a risk that we go towards uncertainty. There's this risk of uncertainty, and that uncertainty may prevail. So what I would like to say is that we need operational, I stress the word operational, scientific advice on which we can take robust regulatory action. This is really a thing in which I believe very strongly. It's beyond policy. It's beyond policy. We need to think of regulatory action to which all stakeholders are bound, and therefore, you know, you need to be really very disciplined on this. Now, to ensure, I would say, that citizens are safe, that the environment is preserved, that we have an economically viable approach, we need science. What is the issue here? The issue is that EFSA is a Ferrari in this respect. Their scientific advice is really excellent, so science is there. But what I see is that whilst for food safety, I mean, we have all the tools and we can go very precise, for sustainability, we are not there yet. And therefore, I would like to urge you all not to think that we need precision now. I mean, what we need is really the direction. You know, Columbus did not discover America because he had a precise map, but Columbus knew the direction. So we need a direction. We need science to direct us. Otherwise, you know, in this new paradigm shift that we are embarking upon, this sustainability, we risk going into solutions that are definitely not science-based. So for me, it's very important that we follow science, we rely on science, and we use it for the direction. At the moment, it's very difficult to have more precision than that. And let me say, we cannot wait. So I thank you all, and I wish you further good work in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for those remarks. And actually, the way you wrapped it up really hit a chord with me, because thinking about data, we know actually that we're accelerating the production of data. So the question is, how do we actually pull data together so that users can actually make decisions on that? And again, this raises all these questions of interdisciplinarity and how we merge the data together. So that was an excellent first talk. I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Ismahane Elouafi. She's FAO's chief scientist, and here she took a leading role in the development of the FAO's science and innovation strategy. And what I found particularly interesting in her bio was she has done quite a bit of work thinking about how to make new technologies inclusive, how to make them available to users who might not necessarily have access. So that really struck a chord with me again, and I would like to welcome Ismahane to the floor.
Thank you very much, Liliane. And I do have slides that I hope are gonna come up. Oh, we need to go back. Apologies. Okay. So colleagues, really a pleasure to be with you today here. And what I'm gonna be talking about is something that we heard this morning. How could we rethink the agri-food system? How could we redesign the agri-food system? But this time, do it based on science, innovation, and data. And I want to start where we are right now. Is this what we want? Is this what we have been working on for the last century? Is it desolation that we want for the next generation, for our kids? It's feeling helpless when you see disaster after disaster after disaster. And I think this year, particularly, after 2 years of COVID, we are caught into a war that is disrupting the supply chain, and that is really hitting again the most vulnerable. And the pictures like this really make us think. I don't want to be a kid like one of these kids. I don't want my kids to see it. I don't want the next generation to go through that. And that's where we have to look for solutions. The solutions are the world is changing, and we have an opportunity in time to make sure that every kid have a secure food. But not only kids from the north, kids as well in the south. We have to be inclusive. We have to look at how technology and innovation can help us to get there. And I'm going to move very quickly to the bright side. The bright side is science, technology, and innovation. We have seen tremendous development in the latest years. If you look at AI and quantum computing, 5 years ago, we were not able to do many things. If you look at the omics, it started very recently. It's really contemporary history. And you look at nanotechnology, you look at so many technologies that were never as mature as they are today. And we need to grasp that. We need us scientists to speak up. We need us scientists to really play our role. Because finally, we got food security and agri-food system everywhere. Since last year with the UN Food System Summit, people are talking climate change and food security. People are talking biodiversity, climate change, health, and agri-food system. So this is a window of opportunity for us to really use the best science. And as Liliane said, use it for all. This time, we cannot afford to leave people behind. And that's exactly what is encapsulated in the new strategic framework of FAO. So FAO started talking agri-food system 6-7 years ago. But our strategic framework, it's all about transforming agri-food system. And the way we want to transform it is that we want at this time to make it more efficient. We want to make it more inclusive. We want to make it more resilient and more sustainable. And we do that through an umbrella of betters. We believe that there are 4 betters that every kid deserves to have. We need to have a better production, and there is tremendous science that exists right now, and that the advancement of science will allow us to do more to get a better production. Because even if you don't believe in it, and I know environmentalists don't want us to produce more, we need to produce more because the population is growing. And we need to produce more smartly, with less. And that's really the dramatic things that we need to find solution for, and there is in science. We need a better nutrition. We are beyond talking quantity. And we did that with the Green Revolution. It played a role, but it's not anymore the talk of today. We need better nutrition for all. And for me, it hurts me. That's why I brought a lot of kids' picture. When I know that kids are not eating well, and that in the first 1,000 days, if they don't eat well, they are wasted forever. This is really something we have to stop. And we need a better environment again. Climate change is not anymore debated, it's a reality. And we need to produce better right now, keeping in mind the environmental footprint. And the last one, it's a better life. And better life for us as FAO, as a member organization that works with 194 countries, we want to make sure that this time farmers and small-scale producers have a better life and better livelihood. And what we have, if you look around the circle, we have accelerators. Accelerators are technology, innovation, data, and complement. And if you look at it closely, all of them need science. All of them requires a lot of science and a lot of innovation. And we do that keeping in mind gender, youth, inclusion, and all these things, we take them really at heart, and we are designing a program to make sure we address them. I want to take the example of the One Health, because it's very relevant to this conference. For the One Health, I mean, finally we understand that things is interconnected. Finally we say, yes, human health is connected to animal health, is connected to plant health, this is really a bit late to talk about it. So I'm very happy that food safety is taking the One Health approach, because that's the only way we can move forward. So the One Health approach has taken some time before people believed in it. I remember it was the first discussion with Canada and Australia and many in the European as well. But I'm very happy that we are coming to a point where we understand it, where we are pushing for it. And that's one of the areas, again, like food security, like malnutrition, where we need everybody to play a role. We need everybody to come on board, to believe in it. We need collaboration. We need advocacy. We need to share data. We need to share information, particularly with the South. We are on this planet. There is no boundaries. The boundaries are created by us. A virus or any microorganism doesn't stop because he doesn't have a passport or a visa. So we have to get outside the bubble that we have created and understand that ecosystems are created the way they are for a reason, and that nature takes over always. So we need really to bring that One Health approach and that interconnectedness in everything we do. And as an optimistic, I want to leave you with a message of hope. I think really scientists, more than ever now, need to speak up. We need really to make sure that we are heard, that we communicate very well with the scientists, of course, but also with policymakers and with the grand public. We can't let really the grand public listen in to the social media of people that have no clue what they are talking about. We need to step up, we need to speak up, we need to use science. Right now, I think we have technologies that can increase productivity in Africa. Why don't we do it? Right now, we have technologies that can multiply it by 5, 6, 7. We need to act. We can't wait more. And for me, sincerely, as a girl from the South that made it to the North, I always think that nobody of us deserves to go to bed hungry, and that we need to act. And science and innovation and technology are beautiful. They were not created to be reserved to only some of us. They were created to really help people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ismahane. That was really inspiring and a great reminder of the big goals we're all working towards. Also, thinking about acceleration, I thought was a really nice point, because of course we can see the changes in the world are accelerating, it feels. So having science and technology also moving along to accelerate, which means that we need to accelerate in terms of how we're learning to navigate those complex challenges with the people that we're working with. So last but not least, I'd like to introduce the third speaker, which is Hans Bruyninckx, who is the Executive Director of the EU Environment Agency. When I was looking at Hans's bio, the thing that struck out to me is that he's really has quite a long time working on research with global environmental policy and governance, but he also translates that into insights for on the ground. What do policymakers, what do civil servants need in terms of knowledge and competency in order to be able to facilitate transitions? So I'd like to welcome Hans to the floor.
Thank you, and good morning. It's great to be here. I've often wondered why I'm paying for food 4 times, at least 4 times. The first time I pay when I go to the shop and I buy food, not agricultural products, food. They've been processed, wrapped, shipped. We've added fat, sugar, and salt to most of them, other stuff, so I pay 1 time. And then the question becomes, am I paying the real time, the real price for food? And the answer is no, otherwise I wouldn't have to pay 3 more times. And the second time I pay is when, through my taxes, I subsidize farmers. Isn't that a bit bizarre that the people who are producing one of the most essential things in life don't make a decent living on this planet if we don't invent systems to subsidize them? I've always found that a bit bizarre. The third time, of course, I pay through my taxes again to deal with the so-called externalities of our food system, which is a term we use a lot in environmental and climate science, because the environmental consequences And the climate consequences need to be attended to, and increasingly so. And the fourth time, we pay through our health systems, because we tend to have a really strong food security in Europe, but not necessarily healthy food habits. So if I think of that, the obvious reflection is there has to be a better way to deal with food in the 21st century. And when I say there has to be a better way, I connect it to all the science and knowledge that is there. Come on, we can do better with all the science and knowledge that is there. We can invent something that is much better than what it is today. But the other has to be better is connected to the messages that are coming from the global scientific community that is talking, in my field, environment and climate, that is talking about a triple crisis: a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and a pollution crisis. Yeah? And all three are deeply connected and intertwined with the food system and with our health. And if you think of the IPCC, which everybody knows, and their reports, it focuses also on the food system. If you think of IPBES, the panel on biodiversity and ecosystem services, it clearly makes the link with food as an ecosystem service that is threatened. There's a third panel that is less known, the International Resource Panel. And that is a panel that focuses on land use, on water use, on other resources that we also use in our food system, and how that has an impact on sustainability outcomes and on distributional issues. And then there is, of course, the World Health Organization, which increasingly links health and well-being to the state of the environment and of the planet. And all of those scientists give us the same message. First of all, we're living in a pivotal decade. If we want to bend the trends, it's now. There is a sense of urgency. And if I can be a bit blunt, maybe, I was here this morning listening to the updates, and I missed that sense of urgency a bit if I compare it to fora that I speak to that are more focusing on climate change or biodiversity loss. We don't have a lot of time. Yeah? The second message that is there is that we already see irreversibilities in the Earth systems. I think this is really important to understand if we think of the future of the food system. What are the irreversibilities that have an impact on the food system, and how will we deal with them? The third element is that we see tipping points in the Earth systems and in social systems, I would claim, that have a strong connection to the food system. The fourth element is that all of these things are interconnected. Yeah? Interconnected in what we now call a VUCA world. It's a volatile world. I think the last couple of years have showed us how volatile it can be. We have to deal with uncertainties, with complexity of going through these transitions, but also the ambiguity sometimes of data, information, of possible outcomes, of trade-offs. So this is a really complex setting in which we are dealing. And the global response to this has been the SDGs, and I would say the SDGs again, because of course we had SDGs 30 years ago. It was called Agenda 21 in Rio, yeah? And we had SDGs 50 years ago. It was called the Stockholm Declaration, which talked about human dignity, well-being, and limits of the planet. And the food system is deeply connected to that whole agenda. Now, the European response is, of course, the European Green Deal. And I would say the food system runs through that Green Deal. Climate. The food system in Europe has not managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the rate that is needed. And the policies that we have for the moment will not get us to climate neutrality. Climate adaptation, which is so critical for agriculture and the food system. Zero pollution, which is a very high ambition, has a lot of relevance for the food system, as you all know very well. Biodiversity, which has a double relationship with the food system contributing to biodiversity loss, but also depending on strong biodiversity. Pollinators, soil biodiversity, which we will need to capture carbon and store it there in a healthy way. And you can go on. Circular economy, which I think is something that we hardly touched when we talk about agriculture and the food system. So all of these elements are there. Yeah? And so the question is, what do we do now? How do we make all this knowledge actionable? And the intellectually stimulating and pleasing approach, which was very prevalent in the excellent updates this morning, is that we of course focus on the new knowledge, on innovation, what do we speed up and scale up, and how do we then end up in a better place? We love to contribute to that sort of dynamic. I think we ought to pay more attention though to what we should be phasing out and stop doing. What is locking us in to a food system that is not sustainable? Just like we asked those questions in the energy system, the mobility system, the built environment. Where are the practices that are holding us back? Why don't we speed up and scale up the solutions that are there? And that means that we need to look carefully at the system. Is it a financial model? Are we locked into a financial model? I think we are. Are we locked into certain technologies that are maybe pushed onto farmers, not to their benefit, but at their expense in the long term? Are we reflecting on market constellation with a food system that is increasingly oligopolistic and not a market with multiple actors that can pressure the farmers again? Yeah? Should we not step out of a logic that approaches this problem by focusing mostly, if not exclusively, on farmers and culpabilizing them rather than working with them to find workable solutions for them and for the planet? Those are the things that through a food system approach, I think we ought to be focusing on. Do we have the knowledge? Yes. Can we improve it? Yes. Data sharing? Absolutely. We also work with Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. There is an incredible amount of data. We need to make sure that it doesn't only produce more noise. We need better sound. Yeah? And that means collaboration in a new way. Yeah? And Bernard, I can tell you, what's suggested this morning, stronger collaboration with the agencies, the hub, I'm all for it. So let's do that indeed and include our partners in the European system. What we also need to do is make our knowledge more actionable. Yeah, Europe is investing indeed more than any other region in knowledge on the food system, on climate, on biodiversity. How do we translate that in actionable knowledge? And then finally, we will need the courage to push back against those, organized, less organized, who are holding us back from making the changes that we will have to make. We have no time to waste. It is a pivotal decade. That sense of urgency needs to be part of all of our thinking, because otherwise the SDGs will be nice on paper, full stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hans, for that also environmental perspective, reminding us of tipping points and irreversibilities and the urgency for making change now, which is a perfect theme for this part of the plenary where we're talking about transitions. I also took note of this idea of phasing out. What should we stop doing, which I think is also critically important. It's not just what we want to do more of, but what we might do less of in order to get us where we need to go. And the metaphor of taking noise and turning it into sound, and then I would say, how do we make it into music to be able to bring us all along? So with that, thank you to the three speakers, and I would like to now pass over to Rose, who you already met this morning, where she led a very nice roundtable panel discussion, and she'll take it away now. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Leanne, for that. Well, hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are now in the final straight of the One Conference here at the Square in Brussels. And I think you would agree that we've had a rich and a very lively debate so far since the official opening on Tuesday afternoon. For those of you just joining us perhaps online, my name is Rosa Donovan, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brussels-based publication AgriFacts. And I had the great pleasure of moderating 2 panel debates so far this week, and they haven't kicked me out yet, so I take that as a good sign. The final panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen, in the next hour or so will be on how scientific advice can help to make our food systems fit for the future. And without further ado, I would invite my panelists to join me on stage right now for the second debate. So Nathalie, Gerda, Joachim, please join us on the podium, and give them a warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, welcome back to Ismahane. And I must say that was very inspiring, your message of hope towards the end of your earlier presentation. Welcome, one and all. So, allow me first of all to introduce my panelists formally so we can get the show on the road. Next to me is Nathalie Schaz. We meet again, Nathalie, welcome. Who is, of course, Director for Food Sustainability and International Relations in the Commission's Directorate General for Health and Food Safety. A lawyer by training, Nathalie served as Deputy Head of Cabinet to the former Commissioner Vytenis Andriukaitis from 2014 until 2019. And of course, earlier on, we heard, of course, from your boss, Miss Sandra Gallina, a formidable force of nature during the COVID crisis, and before that, of course, in trade negotiations. We at Agrifax cover her line of work very closely indeed. We heard from Ismahane Elouafi, who is, as said before, the Chief Scientist of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO of the United Nations, and part of the agency's core leadership structure. Ismahane is internationally known for your work on promoting the use of non-fresh water in agriculture and the empowerment of women in science, an important vocation to be sure. Gerda Verberg, who is the UN Assistant Secretary General and Coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition, the SUN movement since August 2016, working with 65 countries, UN agencies, civil society, business community and donors to tackle malnutrition in all of its forms. From 2007 until October, we're going back, Gerda, a little bit of history on you, on your bio. From 2007 until October 2010, Gerda served as Dutch Minister of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality, right about the time I started out as a rookie journalist with Agrifax as an agricultural journalist. And I have fond memories of you, Gerda, at informal farm councils, where you were always very approachable and always very open to chat. So welcome to you. Joachim von Braun is Professor for Economic and Technological Change at the Center for Development Research at Bonn University in Germany. He is also coordinator of the Transdisciplinary Research Area Technology and Innovation for Sustainable Futures at the same university. And his research areas include international and development economic topics such as markets and trade, poverty, health, nutrition, agriculture, as well as science and technology. And ladies and gentlemen, you may note an absentee on our panel. Unfortunately, Stephen Quest, the Director General of the Joint Research Centre since May 2020, cannot join us for personal reasons, but he sends his best wishes to everyone participating today. So please give my panelists another round of applause of welcome. So we have a lot to get through once again in the next hour, the final hour of the show. So just allow me to go through some housekeeping rules once again. We're going to kick off this panel discussion, first of all, with a Vox Pop video clip from young EFSA trainees on the topic of One Health. More on that in a moment. We're then going to have a panel debate on how scientific advice can help to make our food systems fit for the future until around 12:30 or so. Once each panelist delivers their 2-minute impulse statement, there will be a Q&A session between myself and the speakers, after which point, you know the drill, we're going to open it up to the floor via the platform here in front of me. We'll then wrap up this panel debate at around 12:30, where I will then invite Dr. Leanne Jackson and return the stage to her to provide an overview of the session and deliver some of the key take-home messages and the recommendations before Dr. Bernard Earle formally closes this auspicious event. So now, ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned, we're going to kick off this panel discussion, and I would invite the technical team to run a short video clip with some key messages and demands coming from young, vibrant EFSA trainees when it comes to the One Health approach. So you can roll it there now when you're ready.
We, the youth, are the risk assessors and risk managers of tomorrow. We're here to demand the changes we need to build a better future, more sustainable and more inclusive. 20 years ago, we faced the mad cow crisis. As a consequence, Europe built a legal and institutional framework that ensures the highest food safety standards in the world. Now, this framework has expired. This framework is no longer enough. It is no longer enough to address today's problems. We need to address future problems, and therefore, we need a new framework. Member states institutions, agencies, they are all working in boxes. But the problems are all interlinked.
The One Health approach must become central to all food policies and risk assessments if we want to ensure a sustainable food system in all its dimensions.
However, the One Health approach is only known at the higher academic and policy-making level, not yet by the general public or the professionals who should apply it. Therefore, we have to integrate One Health in our everyday life and make it operational.
Europe needs to engage with the wider public instead of talking mainly with lobbyists and advocacy groups. By involving all relevant actors in the decision-making processes, the implementation of our policies would be easier.
Conditions for strengthened and expanding cooperation have never been better. We have advanced tools and technologies, but they remain underexploited. Let's take them to their maximal potential.
We are asking you for a real change. We need legally binding measures and not only recommendations. The current policy framework is no longer sufficient, and it's now time to change it, to enable us to tackle the future challenges that we have ahead.
And it's not under a remit cannot be an excuse for inaction. What are we waiting for? Let's do it now.
Thank you very much indeed. And just to say that that video message came straight from the heart of the FC trainees based in Parma at the moment. And I think, Natalie, you would agree that it's a veritable call for action. Any initial reaction to that video clip? That should work automatically, Natalie.
Okay. I think it's good to hear the call from the youth. It's supportive to our action, it's supportive to the objective of Farm to Fork, and it reminds us all of our responsibility.
Ismahane, do you have an initial reaction to that short video clip?
I love seeing youth really so engaged, and I think really that's the future. We need to make sure that the public understand, but particularly the youth understand the importance of One Health. Okay. So it's really lovely to see them all across the One Conference speaking up and taking really part of the solution.
And Gerda, would you agree with them that the time to act now, as
yes,
reflected by Hans earlier on?
Of course, nobody can be against it. But I'm also here to challenge a little bit young people, and I hope that they are in the room or that they are connected in another way. Because the what is easy to tell, and everybody can tell you and continues to tell you what we need to do and what we have already to do so. The question is, why isn't it happening? Because we need to address the how, and we need to say what is our common goal, what is our North Star. And this is also something. What do we want? We want to have healthy food systems by 2030 that are serving our nutritional and health needs of people, that provide farmers with a good income, young people with a decent job about the food value chain, and we want to also serve our planet. Because let's be honest, our current food system is bankrupting our health system, and it is really destroying our planet. So we need to have this North Star and then encourage each other to really work together within this framework.
Okay, thanks, Gerda. So we're on the pathway, but as you say, we need that direction of travel just to be, clear in focus. Joachim, any initial reaction to that, the voice of the youth of today?
Yes, you see, change and action was what they said, and change is there. Look at how the youth, the European youth, is changing their diet patterns very fast, unbelievably fast. Action, well, I'm engaged with a large German NGO, and I'm impressed how internationally the young generation is engaging in the current food crisis. So this was not just lip service, it was for real.
And not only the food crisis or the food system, climate change. I think we've seen a real sense of engagement, certainly since my generation, that this new generation, very well informed and engaged is the word there, Joachim. Okay, thanks for that. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to the 2-minute impulse statements. We're on the clock, Natalie, so whenever you're ready, if you deliver your message, your key message today.
Okay, let's say my message is today we can see quite a diversity of values, perspective, assumptions when it comes to sustainable food policy. But we really need our policy to be based on state-of-the-art, transparent and independent science. We are working to implement the farm to fork strategy in a, like Sandra said before, based on a multidisciplinary work. And this multidisciplinary work needs also to take place at the science for policy interface. And when we mean multidisciplinary, it really means more than coexistence. It means combined expertise. I think that's the only way forward.
And do you think that there's a sense of joined up thinking at the moment in the European Commission? You speak of the farm to fork strategy. There's also, of course, the reform of the common agricultural policy. And even this week, Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans said we're going to come up with another comprehensive study looking at the nitty-gritties of food security. Because, of course, as Ms. Gallina just said, there's a little bit of pushback already on some of that, some of those targets within the farm to fork. So how is that joined up thinking taking place currently in the European Commission?
I think we have a joint up approach, but with the new study on food security, we perhaps want to demonstrate what and really show based on solid evidence what are the drivers for food securities and why they are not pushed by sustainability, but sustainability would be the answer. Like the food security and food sustainability are not in tension. But maybe we need to, with next studies, to explain a bit further, to communicate further about what is behind food security compared to what is behind food sustainability.
Okay, thanks for that, Natalie. We'll leave it there for a moment. We'll return to you perhaps to delve in more detail about this legislative framework that's coming on board on the sustainability, sustainable food systems. Ismahane, please, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
So I'm glad that I have another chance to speak about biodiversity and diversification, because I got emotional at the end and I didn't finish it, as a matter of fact. So for me, when we talk about solutions, be it solution to the food safety, be it solution to the food security, be it solution to really look at the sustainability in its broad sense and the 3 pillars of sustainability, it's very important that we go back to diversification. And I think it's the key to our solution, because we tend to be uni-lenses. So if you think about plant, for example, we have about 400,000 species, and we are using right now in the market 125. So when you think 125 out of 400,000, why? Why did we go this far in our narrowing of the species? When you look at a species per se, you go back and you find it's one genotype. And that's the case of potato, for example, in the US. All the variety almost comes from one genotype in the 1800s. So we have reduced our use of the existing species on planet to the extreme minimum. And the only way we can revert back and change the agri-food system, it's by going back to diversification. And that diversification has to be at all levels. Technology alone is not enough. But we need to be diversified in our mindset. We have to bring in diversification in terms of policies to help the diversification, but also in the thinking. So diversification is a must. Ecosystems are meant to produce certain things. And we have been pushing the bar to make them produce what we want. So instead of us adapting to ecosystem, we were trying to push the ecosystem to serve our economical system that is very inequitable, that got us into big trouble. The numbers I didn't talk the numbers at the beginning, but the numbers have been very bad since 2017. It's not just COVID. It's not just the war in Ukraine. It's even before that, the numbers were going very bad. Maybe in the grand scheme of things as a percentage, we're reducing the number of malnourished in percentage of the population, but in terms of numbers, it's increasing as a number per how many people are really malnourished. And that's inequality. So I think diversification could help us to redress where we are, and we need to do this diversification again based on science, innovation, and evidence.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. We'll delve into that in a moment now. Gerda, please, whenever you're ready, your 2-minute impulse statement.
Thank you very much. I'd like to stand up. Thank you for giving me the floor. As I said, I think this is a very interesting conference, and I would like to start with praising the courage of the organizer to put this on the agenda and to have the conversations, and the conversations are extremely fruitful and effective. I've really appreciated the final contributions that we heard before this panel, all very eloquent and all very much to the point. However, we cannot continue to talk about the what and the why. We need to talk about what will be the joint objective and why are we doing this. As I said, because our current food system is bankrupting our health system, and more diseases are food related, but also more and more diseases are climate related. And also our current food system is destroying our planet. So it's clear, if we want to survive and if we want to leave this world a better place to our next generation, something needs to happen. And the North Star can be by 2030. What do we want to see then? We do want to see a food system that is rewarding to farmers, because farmers, they want to dedicate their time to produce our food and the feed for the animals that are around. They want to do it in a qualitative way, in a diverse way, but they want to have a decent income to maintain their family, send their children to school, and to make progress as well, and be recognized for what they are doing. They can also be the stewards of biodiversity and the natural resources contributing there. Then think about the whole food value chain. Why am I telling this? Because as Sun Movement, we have put the North Star at 2030. We want to expire by 2030, and we want all our 65 member countries then to have systems in place that prevent all forms of hunger and malnutrition throughout the whole lifespan, while at the same time taking care of our planet. And this is what has to happen here as well. And therefore, I think this is an excellent conference, but the agenda needs to be set now.
Thank you, Gerda, for that impassioned plea. And we'll be returning to some of those points, Gerda, in a moment, but your fight with the Sun Movement, you know, you're very passionate about that, so thank you for that. Joachim, hard act to follow, but please, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours for your 2-minute impulse statement.
I continue to sit relaxed here, but I think we need to step up. We cannot continue with business as usual, because we are in a food crisis, as many previous speakers have said. We have to. So stay the course may be a fallacy. The One Health agenda needs to be adapted to the short-term challenges and stay the course on the long term. What's needed short-term? Well, a rapid increase of nutrition interventions to protect the poorest. We need to have a perspective on the macroeconomic agenda, trade and finance. Countries in debt can no longer deal with the food challenges. So we have to have a One Health short-term and a One Health long-term agenda. We have heard about climate and the climate agenda, which is so close to the food agenda. But if you read the statement from COP26, you don't find agriculture, you don't find food in it. That needs to change in COP27. Somehow there is a divide, and the One Health agenda and this conference and Europe can make a difference on the climate agenda. Let me simply re-emphasize a second point which Hans made. The food systems have great indirect costs. Quantitatively, we pay in the market $9 trillion per annum for food. But the indirect costs, the environmental costs, are 8 trillion, and the health costs are 11 trillion, preliminary estimates. So we pay not the true price of food. What to do? We need true cost accounting in GDP accounting, in business accounting, and consumers need to see what's their real value. they are paying. I would love to come back later on the agenda for innovation, because out of this dilemma we only get with a precise, doable science and innovation agenda, participatory, which addresses the trade-offs and the risks. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Joachim, and certainly that's a point that we'll be returning to in a moment, so thank you very much indeed for that. So picking up on some of those points made, Nathalie, certainly as well from Ms. Gallina, about this idea that science should play a role in filling this gap between the ambition and reality. That was one of the key takeaways that I took from Sandra Gallina's introductory remarks. What is the role then? I mean, let's get straight to the point. This legislative framework towards a sustainable food system in the EU, affecting all food system actors from farm to fork. In the last panel discussion, Dr. Francesco Bianca said that this would be a game changer. What do you say to that?
That's the plan. This is a new legislation that we are preparing at the moment. The purpose is really to make sustainability as one of at the heart of the food system. A little bit like 20 years ago, we had the General Food Law. They put food safety at the center of the food system in Europe and created, let's say, a whole environment, number of requirements, responsibility, tools at EU level to ensure food safety across the EU in an even manner. So now what we are aiming at with this legislation is to do a bit the same, like the same objective, that now that we have a good framework for safety, we need to achieve sustainability. And we need this overall framework to make sustainability, to ensure that all food that is we have in the EU is becoming more and more increasable. So we have different tools. We will have tools, perhaps options we're looking at to eliminate some really unsustainable practices, and perhaps tools to promote and give incentive or reward the more sustainable practices. But in order to do so, as a regulator, as I said in the beginning, we need science. We need scientific support, and we need combined scientific support from different natural science, economic, social. So we also need that sort of overall approach to be based on science, on multidisciplinary science, and also a little bit like Sandra said at the beginning, knowing that we have reached in food safety a level of, let's say, excellence and complexity that it's not perhaps yes achievable in sustainability. So we will need a science that is fit for purpose. And science fit for purpose means at this stage perhaps accepting more uncertainties.
Okay, thank you for that, Nathalie. Joachim, your point on innovation, investment in research and innovation. Do you want to maybe take the floor and discuss that at a tiny moment?
Yes, I'd love to come back to that, although we had already a great takeaway set of messages from Sandra Gallina. I think we have to be precise what science can change the health and the food system and their interactions in this complicated situation. And we must continue to invest in basic science. The surprises which we got from bioscience, from mathematics and algorithms, from related digitization, we need these surprises for the long term, for the next 30 to 50 years. But now I think we need to focus an innovation agenda on how to overcome hunger, poverty, undernutrition very precisely. And we have good science on that. But we need to invest much more in sustainable land management, the soils, the biodiversity of soils, in order to have that agenda addressed. And we need to connect the macro climate agenda with people well-being science. So socials, when I say science, it's always social science and natural science. So that's where the social science agenda needs to step up to the plate. The One Health agenda is an umbrella for a new science and innovation field that studies not as an afterthought the indirect effects of innovation, but addresses them directly. That's what we need more to. And from a European perspective, we must share our science a lot more, and that requires not just publication and conferencing, it requires capacity building and partnership with Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the rest of the world. That investment is falling short of what Europe, with its responsibility, can do and must do.
Sure. Gerda, I see you shaking your head there. In terms of your involvement with the scaling up nutrition, where do you see the main shortcomings when it comes to the role of science? I mean, we live in a world, as Ismahane, outlined in your introduction there, like a very stark picture, the two children looking out on destruction. So I'm going to just go to Gerda first, and then Ismahane, back to you, about how we can address this very pressing issue. Like, there's a health system, there's a food system that appears fundamentally flawed here if we have so many people starving in the world, and also a question of malnutrition, which is your area of expertise, Gerda.
Yeah, science has to play an important role. Science is not leading on this. So it should be the agenda of the people, the communities, the politicians, if they are trusted by their people who are leading. And farmers respond to their asks, please. Because what I hear around here is that science has the solution. Well, many solutions are publicized, but very often they are models. If our countries like Ghana are asking, or Chad are asking, okay, can you translate these data in a set of data that can create the baseline for our transition of our food system? People say, no, that's complicated, then we need to do this and that, and we need to have funding, etc. Then all the complications are coming up. So I felt very well at home that science, or very comfortable, that science need to come forward with actionable approaches. And of course there is independent science and research, I will not dispute this, but much more actionable, much more solution-oriented, and much more in conversation with the political economy and with normal people, with people out there who want to implement the findings of it. One point about innovation, I have nothing against innovation, at the contrary, but very often we think in big systems that cannot be applied in the remote area, where farmers don't have the energy or the recharges or the manual or the training, etc. Make sure that every innovation that you are proud of can also be applied in the remote area, and make sure that it can be also an instrument in the hands of women, of gender players, because very often in these kind of things, innovative approaches and technologies are first in the hand of men, creating an even bigger gap in equity and equality and opportunity.
Thank you for that, Gerda. A perfect segue now to a chief scientist. Thank you indeed. Ismahane, in your experience as chief scientist with the FAO, how can this scientific advice contribute to this transition to deliver not only safe and nutritious, but also a sustainable food system?
So I think there are two parts. The first part is really, we need to find ways to right now scale up innovations that we have. And there we see a huge divide between the North and the South. So I always talk about the yield gap. The yield gap in Africa. Africa, in any field, almost is producing about 10% of the productivity in Europe. So that's a quick fix. So there are certain innovations that we can scale up now to increase productivity. And those are, many of them are sustainable, and we have the data to do so. But the problem, it's engaging private sector. How could we get a private sector to go in a place where agriculture is a risk? They don't have the same subsidies that you have in the North, and I really salute the talk about repurposing subsidies, and I believe it has to be done in the North and in the South. They don't have access to finance. They don't have access to infrastructure. So this is one component. This is a quick fix that we have to act on it now because there is an urgency to do so. The other component is that all these science areas and sectors that have done superbly nice because we invested in the basic research, as you said, Joachim, we need to invest more. We are just scratching actually up some of those sectors. Like we were talking about today you were talking in the biocom. It's something that we did not know before. So now it's a reality that we could have maybe personalized nutrition. What I'm eating could react completely differently in my gut than the other people's guts. So there is certain areas that we haven't really done enough research in it. So my answer, science and technology innovation can make a huge difference, but not alone. We need to combine it with the policies, with the regulatory framework, with the finance, with bringing all the actors together. But also we need to continue investing in science because what we are finding, it's so beautiful and we can use it if we have really that continuum of innovation that is working well. Because right now it's a bit disrupted.
Disjointed.
The academia is not talking to the science, the people that do applicable science. The applicable science, they're not talking to the development people. So some development people are using technologies that are very old. And then the private sector it's running on their own on certain ideas. So we need really to develop that continuum the way private sector does it. Private sector, it's a sector that finds a way to do it from an idea to a product. And because they are very focused, can we do that with the public as well? Could we bring public and private together in finding solutions and solutions that work well in the South as well? If we don't develop the South, we will always have this problem. It's a must. And in nowadays, it's more than ever because we have, as we said, climate change, it's a huge challenge, but so is loss of biodiversity and particularly food insecurity and malnutrition.
Sure. It's not only a must, it is also to do just and to get the just outcomes. So I think I would like to make it a little bit stronger. I totally agree with you. Do you allow us also to react on it?
Please go ahead, Gerda.
Yes, please. Because I would like to emphasize what Ismahane has said, but working with private sector requires a little bit a different approach, I think. But they need to be challenged because look what's happening. Fuel companies are making all-time high profit during this first quarter of the year. Fertilizer companies do the same. Some food companies the same. Who were the biggest profiteers of the COVID crisis? The food producers, and not the farmers, but the big food companies and the retailers, etc. Are we allowed to ask them what they can contribute to make this world a better place? And whether they will be ready and able to really become part of the solution and rethink their business case. I think it was Bruyninckx who said, okay, what is wrong? Is it the financial system? I think so. And I also think that it's the business case of many companies, because what they are doing is focusing on their clients, keeping their clients happy, and serving their investors and shareholders, and keep them happy, and then make as much as possible profit. What they should do, if they really want to be part of the solution, and not only through lip service or through marketing, is that they need to rethink their business case and include serving their workforce, giving them a decent income and decent nutrition and health care, serving the society, but also serving our planet. And then they can, even though, because those companies who are really including this in their business case are still making profit, but they are the companies who are really contributing to make this world a better place.
Okay, thank you. And there's scope there as well, Gerda, I would imagine, for public-private partnerships, as Ismahane also alluded to earlier. Joachim, in your response, if you wouldn't mind addressing as well the role that environment agencies, such as EFSA, such as the ECDC, such as the ECHA, and the European Environment Agency, as well as the Joint Research Centre. This kind of combined sense of agencies, how can they contribute as well to this larger question of a transition towards a sustainable food system? But if you want to pick up on a point earlier,
Really,
please be free.
It's great news that they are all written here together in this little banderole.
Yes, exactly.
And I hope they stick together and work together and jointly mobilize science and integrate their science units with the European and international science community. When we talk about science and the science system, let's keep in mind a UNESCO number is there are about 10 million scientists in the world. My hunch would be relating to One Health, maybe 1 million scientists. So it's not this committee or that committee or this university or that or the scientists, it's a landscape. And to mobilize the capacities from that landscape remains critical for One Health. And if you take a look at the last year's Food Systems Summit, more than ever, science was mobilized, about 3,000 scientists. So we need to really look at the whole landscape. Does this system work? Does it produce output for the food system and for agriculture? The answer is yes. If you look at what share of total productivity in agriculture in the last 2 decades comes from innovation, it's 80%. It's not more land or more corporate investment or spraying and so on. But in Africa, it's only about 50%. The innovation and science system of the world works, has made a major contribution towards sustainability, but it's not good enough, and that's why we need a change.
Thank you, Joachim. I'm going to bring Nathalie back into the conversation to talk about something that was raised during the first panel discussion this morning, tensions, trade-offs that exist between food safety, food security, and food sustainability. And the crux of the discussion was that, of course, food safety is the sine qua non, but how do we resolve some tensions in this broader landscape that we're now navigating, a very complex environment that we're now navigating in?
I'd say that from a regulatory perspective, we do not really see tension between sustainability and food safety. We've always made clear that food safety is a prerequisite. We've worked on it for years. For us, it is not the case that when building sustainability, we want to undermine food safety. So food safety will remain really the prerequisite. And when we build for sustainability, it will not be at the expense of food safety. Because in Europe, food, when it's not safe, is not food anyway. So by definition, looking at from a very legal perspective, it's no longer food. So this, for us, cannot happen. Let's say we really see food safety as the first building block. It will stay, and perhaps on top of it, in our food system, we need to create a new building block of sustainability. Now, when it comes to the discussion between food security and food sustainability, again, is at tension. I think the two objectives are desirable. What we believe is that there will not be long-term or medium-term food security if we do not achieve sustainability. We see it every day. And one of the main causes of threat to sustainability, to food security, are climate change. You have extreme events, you have drought, you have environmental degradation, you have biodiversity loss, loss of pollinators with the impact on production. So we see that sustainability will reinforce food security. Of course, we know there are, and there will still be shocks to the food system. We've had the COVID-19 pandemic. We know of the war in Ukraine. We know this shock exists. We know we need to overcome them, and the food system needs to still perform its duty. There will be more shocks in the future, But all the challenges we are facing, the challenge of sustainability, the climate change, the biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, the fact that the health system doesn't provide a healthy diet for citizens, doesn't offer it the way it should, it will remain. So we believe we are trying to build a food system that, of course, keep food safety at the center, because otherwise it's no food.
Sure, it's the sine qua non, as we say, yes.
And then equally, security and sustainability.
Okay, thanks for that, Natalie. Ismahane, if you'd like to come in there on the question of trade-offs and tensions within the broader landscape that we find ourselves in, geopolitical and otherwise.
Absolutely. So I think there will be always trade-off, and what we have to do is really bring information and facts and evidence and try really to analyze how, if, for example, we produce more in certain ecosystem, how this could affect the food safety and what have you. But I think really what we need a little bit to step back as we are thinking about rethinking the agri-food system is that really we have to keep in mind that we are losing a lot for diseases right now. So you remember in human health, this starts with the cost of human health, and we got really very good numbers there, and that has convinced both policymakers and the public to invest more in prevention. When we talk about food safety, many of the food safety issues are related to plant health or animal health issues. So if we take the same approach of the cost or the burden of the plant health in the plant sector, the burden of animal health when we talk about the animal, we need to do much more prevention than before. Because right now we understand it better. Again, we need more data and we need more information, but we have a capacity to utilize better the data we have with the computing power that we have now and with the AI and what have you. What we need to look at those entry points where we have to reduce the loss. The loss in the field, it's huge, it's about 17%. So when we talk about food waste and loss, based on the numbers we have at FAO, it's about 17% in the field and about 17% as a waste in the post-production side. So it's very important to address them, and by addressing them, we are keeping in mind the One Health approach, and we are keeping in mind the food safety. By addressing them earlier, we reduce a lot the cost, and we reduce a lot the food safety risks. So the trade-offs are very important, but for us now, I think we should focus as well on the synergies.
Sure.
How could we bring some synergies between them, particularly when you think nutrition, when you think food safety and food security?
Natalie, if I could just bring you in there on food waste and food loss. Is there going to be an element within that broader legislative framework on sustainable food systems? I would presume so, as this is, again, a low-hanging fruit when it comes to, I suppose, this indictment against us that there is so much food waste. I believe one third of the food that we purchase as consumers is thrown out. So that's something that we could certainly address. But what, in regulatory terms, what will be included, or can you even tell us what might be included in this new legislative framework that you're working on?
We're working on it, not necessarily as part of its framework. Already we had a legislation at EU level, the Waste Directive, where we had some condition requirements, provision applicable at EU level. What we're trying to define now, we're working on it, is whether we're going to define targets, both at EU and member state level, a little bit to crystallize the efforts that are ongoing at the moment, but remain very uneven at EU level. Some member states are really making important efforts to reduce food waste. In some member states, it looks a little bit more difficult. So perhaps to focus efforts, we are working on the proposal to introduce some targets so that we aim for strict, really reduction of food waste, which is indeed very shocking and not very ethical when you look at the situation of the number of people in Europe who cannot afford a proper meal and how much food is wasted and how much natural resources are then wasted.
Sure.
So we are working on it, yes, but in a different piece of legislation.
Okay, Natalie, thank you. Gerda, I've got a question for you. How are we going to get the ball rolling? You're very passionate, obviously, coming from the Sun movement. But who needs to make the first move You say the time is now, and I think that's the general agreement, that there is no time to waste. It's no longer time for business as usual. But who needs to make the first leap of faith and get that ball rolling?
Well, I think there is something behind the organization of this conference. There is a kind of agenda. So make this agenda explicit and start to tell the narrative of where we want to be and could be by 2030 if we would follow and roll out this agenda. And in this agenda, there is the need to involve all stakeholders from a country perspective, because solutions cannot be dropped from the global level to each country level. It cannot be done only by regulations, but bring the right stakeholders around the table and make them part of the whole game so that they can contribute and can also put on at the table the trade-offs and the risks they see, and so that you can leapfrog them or bring them into harmony. Let me give you an example of my period as a minister. The use of antibiotics in the animal sector was by far too high. And my civil servants advised me to create legislation there with very narrow prescription, etc. I'm a farmer's daughter, and I knew my family didn't like all these detailed prescriptions because there is too much bureaucracy. So I invited all the players from out of the animal sector, and I said, okay, I give you 2 years to come forward with concrete and reliable proposals to reduce the use of antibiotics by 50%. And they said, impossible, impossible, you're killing the animal sector in the Dutch agriculture. I said, okay, at the same time, I will start to do legislation because I think it is possible. And all the people I had requested to, I had consulted also said, it is possible. So within 1.5 years, they came forward with proposals with the support of science. They were supported by Wageningen University and by other universities, etc. Very reliable proposals that really reduced the use of antibiotics by 50%. And you know, after 3 years, they came to me and they said, our animals are more healthy, are more productive, and they have better well-being. So later on, they added another 20% of reduction. So much is possible, but you need to not be scared of the friction and not bounce back. And for that reason, I'm very much in favor of the round tables that are taking place at country level when it comes to food systems. But what you need is an independent, courageous moderator that is able to make sure that the indigenous farmer, that the woman is as important, has an as important voice as a big producer has.
Okay, thank you, Gerda, for that. Thank you very much indeed. Following on, Joachim, the idea of alliances. Can you maybe pick up on that? The idea of a round table to get this show on the road, basically, towards a sustainable transition to a more resilient food system, let's say.
Actually, this is a specific proposal from the Food Systems Summit to bring science community around round tables. And not only the scientists from the academic background, but also indigenous knowledge communities, the private sector ones, those in civil society. So that is necessary. Why? Not because you can add up science from the various sources, but in order to deal with tensions and in order to bring about a rational change in currently protracted debates. What will be helpful in resolving tensions, and especially over the trade-offs and synergy issues, is the One Health and the food systems policy-making community needs to become at least as model-savvy as the climate policy-making community. The climate policy-making community has gotten used over the last 30 years about understanding the science of modeling, of how policy change may impact greenhouse gas emissions, temperature, ocean, terrestrial, etc. We don't have that in the food system, and that's a major problem. So I see dangers that the One Health approach and the food systems approach remain in the talk shop area rather than get clear evidence-based framing. Policy then can do what citizens and their electorates and whoever, well, they need to deal with trade-offs, but science, bringing the options to the table, need to be understood. So we don't only need to lower the complexity of messages on the scientist side, but we also need to heighten the understanding level at the policy and administrative side in the food and One Health.
Thank you, Joachim, for that. Please.
Yeah, and I fully agree with Joachim. We need to do that from both sides to bring them closer, and we need really, again, to step up. So, and that's where really it's very important to keep a holistic view. It's to really have the bird view on what's happening and understanding why. And maybe also questioning the whole agri-food system, and that's really what we are saying. Is it the right way to continue, or should we back up and do things differently? And there, really, that was the heart of our strategic framework at FAO. The fact that we work with 194 countries, the fact that we are a knowledge hub for them, and we are providing them knowledge. The fact that we do technical capacity, we do policy advisory, we do as well matchmaking in many ways with what's happening. What we have learned over the years, sincerely, is that the solutions are local. We talk about global problems, and yes, because we are on one planet, but when you go to solutions, a solution that works in country A or community A, it's not working in B. And that's where the local knowledge and the indigenous knowledge, it's very, very important. Sure. We haven't married it enough. We haven't tried to change our language, and that's what Joachim also was saying, and Gerda, is that really we need to maybe simplify our language, bring in local knowledge and indigenous knowledge with the innovations, and by the way, the medical field did it. Most of the product that we have as antibiotic or as any effective, it comes from a knowledge somewhere that they use this plant or this insect or this component for this, and they work and dig into it and find the active product and use it as a medicine. Most of them, there is a history behind. So we need really to do that in the agri-food system, and keep in mind that we need local solutions that are context-specific, that works for those people. We have been too much copy-paste, and the copy-paste does not work. Customization, it's not enough. We need really to keep in mind the ecosystem, the culture, the policy framework that exists in certain countries. All of this has to be mixed together to find a solution that works well and increase productivity, nutrition, and protect the environment. Those three have to come together. We can't really separate them anymore.
As you say, a holistic approach, but also a tailor-made view of the bigger picture. Now, if you don't mind, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to go to some of the comments coming in on the platform. We have a comment from David Gott. Science often strives to be transparent and explain its reasoning and risk assessment. We often see other legitimate factors involved in policy choices that remain opaque at best. How can we make the whole system more transparent? Who'd like to take that one? So more transparency, hands up, Gerda, first up there.
This is not about transparency. It is about a non-understanding between science very often and the political advisors and the political economy. And it's also, sometimes it is the language that is used by scientists. And for that reason, let me repeat what Ismahane has already said, the dialogue and the communication and the understanding of what is normal people keeping awake during the night because they are puzzling about their future. This conversation needs to happen more, and it would be great if this could also part of the education. Translate your findings in normal people's language and think about how you can make it understandable and translatable into policies and legislation that are really can really contribute to the solutions.
Thanks, Gerda. Natalie, you'd like to jump in there?
Maybe to react because of the legitimate factor is very much part of our EU legislation. Let's say I don't see the problem as posed in the question. What we have so far is decision on food safety. So first safety, I say, is the first pillar. But as I say, maybe it's not enough. Maybe people want more than food safety. And that's a little bit where other legitimate factors has come into play. There are cases where civil society say, yes, maybe this is safe, or risk manager, not just civil society. But that's not good enough because we have issues, could be ethical issues, could be animal welfare issues, it could be environmental protection issues. So these were not really part of the strict assessment of food safety so far. So having now really a discussion on sustainability, on what science tells us about sustainability, and yes, transparent decision on sustainability should, let's say, reduce this tension. This time I agree we have tension on what we had in the past called as legitimate factors.
Okay, thanks for that. Natalie, do you have a point on transparency from an FAO perspective?
So I would talk about much more what us as scientists should do. I mean, I wouldn't attempt to say I understand how the political system works, and I am always puzzled why the decision is made this way. But I think us as scientists, we need to communicate more, and we need to communicate in a way that people can understand us, policymakers can understand us. And social media, it's a great way of doing it. I'm one of the people that doesn't like much social media, but I recognize that it's the best way to influence. It might not be my style, but it's really a very strong way of passing information. And one of the things that we are doing under the new strategic framework of FAO, the Science and Innovation Strategy, it's really focusing on science communication. We need, as FAO, and I think all scientists, need to speak up about what we know, what we don't know, what are the risks, and what are the mitigation strategies. We can't keep a vacuum. We tend to run away from contentious issues, but those contentious issues, if we don't address them, somebody's going to address them, and that somebody, if it's a private sector or a community or a group, they have a stake at it. So it's very important, and that's really one of the new areas that we are insisting on at FAO, is that we speak up to clarify issues. We are not taking for or against, but we are playing our role as a convener, as an independent organization, to really clarify issues. So I hope that with this, combined with one idea that Joaquin mentioned, which is how climate change got it there, how climate change over 30 years really find a better way to bring science, policy, and society interfaces in a better way. And really, this we need to do it in the agri-food system. Agri-food system is large, it's big. Like when I came first to FAO and I said, what do we work on? It's agriculture and food, and agriculture is everything. It's plant production, animal, fisheries, forestry, it's broad. And when you add in it all the processing and the complication that we have right now in any product, you find something coming from a plant or an animal, even in construction, in things that are far away. So it's very important for us to grasp how to do it. We learn from what climate change did. We learn from what biodiversity did, maybe some countries and region, and find a way to influence policymakers. Because if we don't influence them, policy can kill a technology, can kill an idea, or can make it the one to be accelerated and to be implemented.
I couldn't agree more, but it will be even more complicated than when it comes to the climate and biodiversity part. But we're not afraid of having a challenge.
So Gerda, for you, a question would be your main message to the audience today. What sort of action can we take to our participants here in the room, participants online? What is your message to them? What is your key message that we can make a difference for this more ambitious future that we so strive for?
Yeah, agree upon one narrative and one goal. So that's one. Secondly, take all the the courage that you have and be determined to get there. Don't be scared of frictions when you're sitting around the table, because frictions create new energy and can bring you further. Otherwise, you might continue to have an elephant in the room. Invite people, but also companies, if they are around the table, and institutions to leave egos and logos at the door. Have a moderator who is independent, who has no agenda, and then I think start with creating low-hanging fruit, define the successes where you need each other to succeed, and celebrate this success, because with success and celebration of success, more trust will grow, and you will find yourself in a place where you can build upon to have more successes. Finally, be ready to, at a certain moment, also take one step back. So don't panic if you are not exactly on the timeline, because sometimes in life you need to take one step back, think a little bit, go back to basics in order to make 2 or 3 steps forward and move on. But keep the narrative and the objective as a kind of North Star.
Thank you for that, Gerda. Joachim, would you like to add something to that? This idea of a North Star, what sort of actions can we take? All of us here in the room, what's your message to us?
Well, it's difficult to bring up new thoughts at an end of such a rich conference. So I want to first compliment what has been achieved here. But I think the show needs to go on. So repeat these types of conferences on One Health at the European level. I have 2 messages. One is it doesn't count if you don't count it, so we have to count the indirect effects of the food system. The true cost of food, which are so far removed from the actual pricing of food. This is fundamentally wrong on people well-being grounds, on health grounds, on environmental grounds. So start true cost accounting is message number 1. And 2, Europe should not get dogmatic with its Green Deal and the farm to fork, but constantly put it to the test. And I think in view of the change of the world, that test is to be done now. Because the consequences of European policies on Green Deal and farm to fork for the rest of the world are not well conceptualized at this stage. So they need the partnership of the rest of the world, especially the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. And I suppose the response would be that that's a work in progress, definitely. It's the farm to fork is sort of a longer term strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am conscious of time. We are going to wrap things up there. We are coming to the end of our One conference. I would like to thank my panelists for this impassioned, lively and interesting debate. My thanks once again to Nathalie Schaz, Ismahane Elouafi, Gerda Verburg and Joachim von Braun. Please give them a very warm round of applause. I would invite you now to be seated in the auditorium, and we send, of course, our best wishes to Mr. Stephen Quest and look forward to catching up with him very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, my work here is done. So thank you very much indeed to Dr. Earl and his fantastic EFSA team for inviting me here today. As you can imagine, that there is a flurry of activity behind the scenes that has been going on for many months now, and I've been privileged to be part of that. A warm thanks and my appreciation to the wonderful team, Barbara, Jan, Shinsia, Ed and Vanessa, for putting this impressive show on the road, and also the technical team who made, I think one could say, everything run so smoothly without a glitch from day one. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the One Health approach gains traction, as it gains momentum, who knows, perhaps we might be here again this time next year to be continued. But now I would like to invite our chairwoman, Dr. Leanne Jackson, to return to the stage and hear your key take-home messages and your closing remarks. Thank you very much, Leanne, and until we meet again, take care.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit hard to imagine summarizing all these discussions. So if you'll bear with me, I was thinking of a metaphor that we could use to talk about the kinds of themes that came out from this panel, but also throughout the week. So if you remember, the second part of this plenary session, the theme was how scientific evidence can help make food systems fit for the future. And we had a lot of metaphoric language coming in, including this path, finding a path to the transition. So if you allow me, if we think about this path to change, clearly we need a North Star. We need to know where the direction is. We also need some transportation. For me, maybe we could think of that as the technology and innovation that we're producing, but we have to think about the pace of change. So we have to think about what it takes to actually accelerate transitions. Science fits into all of those, right? So we need a North Star, we need science and evidence to help shape our direction. Obviously, with innovation, we need science and technology helping with that too. We've heard lots of messages around investing in basic science, making sure that it's inclusive in terms of different stakeholders, different groups, the disadvantaged, investing in sustainable productivity growth. But for me, the key question is, what do we do about the pace? How do we make sure that we're moving along the path fast enough so that we can solve some of these problems that we can see coming towards us? And I was thinking about what I think is an African proverb, which is basically says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But actually, we need to figure out how to go fast together. And here, I think we heard a lot of messages around needing to figure out how to bridge different communities, drawing together in a consultative way stakeholders who can help inform policy decisions. We need to figure out how to get scientific communities communicating across disciplines as well, and clearly we've had a lot of that conversation in this conference. And we need to think about those kinds of interactions also in the context of building trust, because it is complicated to have those kinds of communication with groups that you might not see the issue in the same way. And science can help with that as well. So we can turn to facts and evidence, we can try to talk to each other about what we actually know about the systems and where we're headed with our North Star. And I think with that, you can build trust and you can also increase the learning across the communities that are all trying to take action. So that's my metaphor for pathways to get us to sustainable food systems. And with that, I would really like to pass over to someone who probably doesn't need an introduction in this conference. So Bernard Uhl, who's the Executive Director of EFSA, I'm passing the floor over to you for your final remarks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. What a journey for me also, personally here. I felt it a bit like being on a cruise ship for 4 days. And we have sailed to many harbors. We had cinemas, bars, lunches. We didn't have a casino yet, but maybe for the next time. And I'm humbled, impressed, I have to say. I'm impressed. Also a bit emotional how our journey went from data, evidence, science, emotions, passion. It was all put on stage. And we as EFSA, we are a small organization. And we made it possible in a way to put this, you, the speakers, the audience here in this room in Brussels. I'm quite proud of that, I have to say. And I was surprised about the unity of the messages. There seems to be a big alignment that something has to be done, actions have to be taken. I think there was also an elephant in the room, at least for me, that's equity and equality. I don't think we will be successful without touching and, well, solving these questions. So I was also wondering, we are here in this wonderful venue, it's a black room, we are, sophisticated, educated people talking to each other, telling us things partly that we already know, but we are repeating it, and then we go out and what happens? What are we going to do on Monday? We always say, yes, it's time for action, now it's time for action. I'm not sure. What is it what makes it so difficult to put this in motion? Now we could say, well, let's not be too pessimistic. Many things have been achieved, so we can also be proud. Yes, I think we can be proud, but it's also a bit of a Eurocentric approach. When we are proud of what we have achieved, it's a quite European approach, and I think we have to be careful. You mentioned, Joachim von Braun, not to be dictating or not to be dogmatic on policies that are made here in Europe. What we wanted to do with this conference is to show how food safety can be integrated in a bigger picture of sustainability. From safe food via balanced diets to food that is produced in sustainable food systems. And everybody was agreeing that we need a systemic approach to that. So it does not help us to be fragmented and to look at individual parts of the equation. A systemic approach. And what is the role of science here? I listened very carefully. Gerda, you said science is not leading. No, science cannot lead. It must be led by policies, by politicians. But science can obviously support and deliver what was mentioned more than once, actionable evidence. Evidence that can be used on the field, that can be used to do something and not only to publish in impact-rich journals. So actionable evidence was one of the keywords that I will take away also from this conference. I also think that science, the industry of science, the scientific industries have become so fragmented, digging deeper and deeper on ever smaller pieces of land, producing knowledge in an incredible speed. But what I miss is the science of integration. How can we integrate all this knowledge into something that makes sense? The sense-making part. And there I come back to our role also, now a bit more egoistic or a bit more limited, the EU scientific agencies. How can we work together better to support our policymakers with reliable, actionable scientific advice that can be put into regulatory measures and into policies? And there I think we have to admit we are not good enough. We are still in the comfort zone. We are not good enough. And the conference was an attempt to bring us out of the comfort zone and say, it's time to do something, because in change management we would say we only act if there is a burning platform. But the platform is burning. The planet is burning. The wildfires are burning. The burning platform is there. So also for us as scientists, I think it's not enough to do business as usual. It's wonderful. I'm a bit blunt now. It's wonderful and needed to talk about the latest developments in benchmark dose modeling. It's needed. But as was said also often today, we need also robust science that shows us if we have a North Star, how can we get there with dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity? So also in science, I think we have to be careful. What is the trade-off between being as certain as possible, and it takes us 5 years to do a risk assessment, which is not an exaggeration, by the way, sometimes, and what is an accepted level of uncertainty so that actions can be taken. So I think there's a homework for us also in the scientific community. But not only in the regulatory agencies, also in academic science. How can we bridge this gap between academic research, hypothesis-driven, and our needs in the regulatory science field, where we still see a gap because data is not accessible, different languages, outcomes cannot be utilized on. So still a lot of work to be done, but my main plea would be we have to do this together. And I see Hans Bruyninckx in the audience, one of our co-fighters for collaboration. We have to do this together. There's no alternative besides doing it together. And this conference also had, so to speak, a meta intention or a meta objective is to bring people together. To bring people together, to have the human encounter, to build trust that allows us to collaborate. Nothing happens without trust. Everything is complicated without trust. We need regulations, SOPs, control, everything is slowed down. If we have trust, and trust is also a personal decision. Trust is not only something that builds over the decades, it's a decision that I say, I trust you, knowing that I can be and most likely will be disappointed once. And still I trust you because I take the risk to expose myself to the danger of being disappointed, and still I trust you because this is the basis for collaboration. And only this trust can build the partnerships we need for the future. Partnerships we understand as long-term, trustful collaboration built on common objectives and shared values. These partnerships within an ecosystem, that is what we are striving for. So in this respect, I think the conference was a success. We brought people together. I heard a lot of positive feedback, and we will continue on this path. And I can tell you that we as EFSA and with our sister agencies, we will not let this go and say, we tick the box, we had a nice conference, food was good, the weather in Brussels comes back to its normality now. Okay, we cannot change that. So it's not enough, and we will continue to work on that and build this One Health as a rallying point, as a stepping stone, as something that unites us in this systems approach. We will put this center in our agenda. If you allow me also a personal remark. When we watch TV in the evening, we see events that are abhorrent. And it makes me feel, in my position, quite privileged. And I think this will be true for many of us here in the room, that we are privileged on this planet. And I think, and I would argue that this privilege comes with obligations, which for me means we as scientists, we not only have the obligation to contribute to science, but as citizens, I think we also have an obligation to make sure that this planet will not be ruined out of greed and ignorance. I think there we have a bigger responsibility than just doing scientific research or regulatory science. And in addition to that, looking around in Europe and not even looking at the Ukraine, I think we also have an obligation to defend the liberal democracy. It's not a given, it's not a natural science, it's not a natural constant that we have it. It has been fought for centuries, and we are so blessed to have it. And I think we have to stand up and defend it at every occasion, also for, I would say, for the future of the European Union. Thank you very much. Thank you. Speaking of the future of the European Union, on behalf of the French presidency of the European Union, I'm honored now to welcome here on stage Mr. Charles Martin Ferreira from the French Ministry of Agriculture and Mr. Philippe Baudenet from the French Ministry of Environment. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Please welcome the gentlemen, please.
Thank you very much, Bernard. We are very pleased to close this session as witnesses, not only of this session, but also of 6 months of European presidency. And it's the end for us of those 6 months, and we are quite relieved also because it's the end. We attended to this meeting, and we heard a lot of very interesting things. And One Health was one of our topics. We we said that it was very important in all our conferences since 6 months. So we hope that this conference, but also all the conferences we have held in France during the last 6 months, path the way to a more One Health policy in the next few years. What we retain from the exchanges of today, well, I have to recall that the environment is a major determinant of our health, and nearly 20% of disease are caused by a degraded environment. And that has to be tackled, and that has also to be tackled with the food productions. And so sustainable food, it's an opportunity to prevent certain diseases and contribute to the health of the planet and animals. The aim is to produce better and also differently, while respecting the health of the environment, animals and farmers, but also of consumers. And so there's an objective of food security, but there is also, as Nathalie recalls us, an objective of food sustainability, and that's of course very important for us. And that's a very important message of this conference. Everyone agrees on the fact that there's a need of transformation of our food systems in this direction, and we need more ambitious European and national policies and changes in expertise and evaluation. And well, Charles, if you can complete that.
Many thanks. The COVID-19 pandemic has come to remind us the close links between human, animal, and ecosystem health. The prevention of those crises is an essential step. It requires good implementation of the One Health concept in public decisions from the international to the territorial levels, as close as possible to the citizens. Prevention of this crisis falls within our responsibilities and requires good coordination of our actions. Unfortunately, we must prepare ourselves to deal with new crises at the interface between animal and human health. Monkeypox, caused by a virus transmitted to humans by infected animals, most often rodents, is the latest example of the multiplication of these zoonoses. We must collectively organize ourselves to earlier detect them and to deal with them.
So you have understood that it's a duo. Europe is mobilized to respond to these challenges and influence national policies as close as possible to citizens. The EU framework guides towards the One Health approach with many strategies like the Green Deal, like the strategies for chemicals, sustainable chemicals, like the zero pollution targets. And there's a context for the revision of the regulation for chemical products and also on the labeling of dangerous products, the CLP regulations. And so it's important to move forward on the theme of alternatives to pesticides, or to place the endocrine disruptors at the agenda of the CLP regulation as a new class of hazard. We have a national strategy, for example, on endocrine disruptors in France. We learned during our conferences, during our presidency, that Belgium had also such strategy in place. And when you look at the number of chemical substances that can be endocrine disruptors, it's mainly 900 substances. And so if we do not share the charge, the load to all the agencies, the national agencies, but also the European agencies, to know if those substances are endocrine disruptor or not, it will take hundreds of years to solve or to tackle the problem. So we have to cooperate on that matter as on other matters.
I would like also to mention the need to promote conditions for sustainable agriculture without this being at the expense of EU food security and reciprocity of standards in trade. Moving towards greater sustainability is a key objective of farm-to-fork strategy. And to achieve this, a systemic approach is needed, and as such, the Commission's ongoing initiative to establish a legislative framework for a sustainable food system by 2023 will be welcomed. At the UN Food Systems Summit in September 2021, the importance of science to support the transition to greater sustainability was highlighted. Science, research, innovation must enable us to move towards modern farming systems in order to take advantage of knowledge, data, and digital technologies. At the European level, I would like to mention just two main initiatives in favor of innovations that are part of the One Health logic. EFSA recently recognized the impact of the word carried out under the European Joint Programme One Health, coordinated by the French agency ANSES, with 44 partners, research organizations and food safety agencies from 22 countries to contribute to the development of surveillance and risk assessment tools on foodborne diseases, antimicrobial resistance, and emerging infectious disease. In addition, scientific work to support the vaccination strategy against highly pathogenic avian influenza is ongoing. Vaccination thus complement biosecurity, surveillance, and other preventive measures aimed at reducing the risk of spread of these epizootic diseases and thus significantly reduce the number of healthy birds to be preventally slaughtered every year. So, what are the lessons learned from the French presidency of the EU Council? France has wanted to give substance to the One Health approach through various events during its presidency, responding to the need of decompartmentalization in order to meet health challenges. And I will refer to three main events. The International Preserve Initiative, launched in January 2021 by the President of the French Republic. As such, research organizations have set the ambition of understanding the risk linked to the emergence of zoonotic diseases, the ambition also of developing and implementing innovative methods to improve prevention and early detection. Secondly, a one-day seminar on epidemiological surveillance platforms held in last March, which was the opportunity for rich discussions about this French initiative on animal health, plant health, food chain surveillance for improvement of the coherence of surveillance action and optimization of their costs. This original governance is based on collaboration between private, public actors, sectors, disciplines, which favors a continuous process of empowerment of all actors involved in surveillance. And thirdly, antimicrobial resistance. In this regard, France has organized an interministerial meeting with the participation of European agencies, FAO, WHO, and the World Organization for Animal Welfare, WOA. This conference was an opportunity to reach consensus on very concrete proposals, and the presidency trio of the EU Council, namely France, the Czech Republic, and Sweden, called in a joint declaration for the EU and its member states to focus urgently on unmet needs.
One thing was also very important during our presidency was the launch of the PARC initiative. We have seen that there is a need to have an harmonized conditions of assessment of chemical substances. And so the PARC partnership was launched in May in Paris. It mobilizes 28 countries, 200 partners, with 400 million euros of support for over 7 years. And so it will allow us to progress with several aspects, reinforce biomonitoring at European level, with in particular the extension of the environmental monitoring, develop hazard assessment of substances with new approaches, the famous NAMs that we need in the REACH evolution, to develop the risk assessment of chemical substances to take into account new issues related to mixing, and also to support for European Commission strategies on chemicals. This project mobilizes EFSA, ECHA, and EA in a One Health approach by the multidisciplinary nature and the governments of the project. So what we want to make now is to take those lessons and to act, because that's also what we want to make. It's not only to say we have learned lessons, it's also to do things. And during the conference in Paris in May, we organized a lunch with the responsible of the French agencies on health and food safety, and also with people from the European agencies, ECHA, EFSA, and EEA. And during that lunch, we have proposed some things to do in the next months in order to take concrete steps and to move forward. One example is the work that has been done by ECHA and EFSA on the guidelines on the bee protection when you use pesticides. And such example is very interesting, and we think we should make other things like that with the cooperation between the national agencies and the European agencies. And I think that we will talk about that in 1 hour or so with Bernard. And I hope that you will learn more about this in a few days.
So at the time when France is preparing to hand over to Czech presidency, it must be acknowledged that the scientific presentation and exchanges that mark these 3 days are important. During discussions with French presidency representative and during ministerial meetings to which EFSA and other EU agencies were invited to contribute, certain areas for action by policymakers have been highlighted. I'm convinced that new approach of risk assessment, revisited in the sense of One Health, based on enhanced collaboration of all our 5 European agencies and strengthened cooperation between national and European agencies, could better inform the policies that shape the transformation of production systems, be they industrial or agricultural. This will greatly facilitate the transition to safer and more sustainable systems. European agencies have the experience to bring together the expertise of the member states to propose harmonized standards, common databases, and knowledge. And I'm convinced that they are the best placed to achieve this objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Philippe. What a wonderful sign that the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment and Ecological Transition give together this presentation, because I remember histories in my country at least where this was not always a friendly relationship within such ministries, but that might not be true for other countries, of course. So with this we come to the real end of this conference. But I have to say a few words about my colleagues who have been in the background of all that and who have made this available. This conference would not have been possible without the dedication of so many of my colleagues at EFSA. And there was an enthusiastic project team. They already partly started to travel because of the interruptions in the air traffic system, so I cannot call them on stage, but still I would like to name them. There was Marta Hugos, our former chief scientist. She was a bit also the spiritus rector of this conference. We have Andras, the project manager, who had difficult month in the past 2, 3, 4 months, and the colleagues started to work on this conference almost 2 years ago. We have Jan, who organized the scientific program and was responsible for the content development. We have Carolina, Virginia, Vanessa, responsible for the event logistics. We have Elisa, Matti, and Cinzia for communication and engagement. And in contrast to our former conferences, this time we also enjoyed working together with an array of partners. They helped us to organize and co-shape the conference. So a special thanks also to our sister agencies and the colleagues there, the ECDC, ECHA, EA, EMA, and the Joint Research Center. And in addition to that, to make this thing really round, we had EU institutions, member states, international partners, influential scientists who have been invited to provide their input, their feedback on the scientific program through a member state and an external advisory board. So thank you very much for your efforts and for your commitment. Thanks a lot. And finally, I wish to thank you, all of you, every one of you who contributed either as a speaker, a panelist, a moderator, a rapporteur, a participant here in the room or online. You all have contributed to the success of this event, and you have seen today when the feedback on the thematic axis came on the screen, not only a lot of information, but also food for action. Actionable evidence came up. So we will do something, and I'm looking forward to the next conference in this style. Let's see how we can pull that off. In the meantime, I wish you a safe journey back, and come back to our next conference. Thank you very much.